The courtroom was unusually quiet that afternoon. The usual murmur of voices, the rustling of papers, and the clinking of the judge's gavel were drowned out by the tense silence hanging in the air. The spectators sat at attention, eyes glued to the proceedings as the most unexpected figure made his way to the stand. Elon Musk, the CEO of SpaceX and Tesla, walked in with a calm, collected demeanor. He had been in the spotlight countless times, whether launching rockets into space or announcing groundbreaking technological advancements. But today, he was not a man of rockets and electric cars. Today, he was just another man in a courtroom, facing the wrath of Judge Jessica McKenna. Judge McKenna was known for her sharp wit and even sharper tongue. She was a seasoned veteran of the bench, with decades of experience in the law. Her reputation was well established, she didn't suffer fools lightly, and she certainly didn't think much of tech moguls like Musk. To her, he was just another billionaire who thought his wealth and fame could shield him from the rules of the courtroom. As Musk approached the stand, McKenna couldn't resist a smirk. She sat back in her chair, scanning him with an air of skepticism. "So, Mr. Musk," she began, her voice dripping with sarcasm, "I presume you have a firm grasp of the law, seeing as how you've managed to successfully launch a few rockets and dominate the electric car industry. But tell me, do you truly understand the intricacies of corporate law? Or are you just here because you think your genius can apply to every field?" The words hung in the air, and Musk's legal team exchanged nervous glances. But Musk himself remained unfazed. He had heard worse from critics, both in public and private. He had faced challenges that threatened the very existence of his companies. But this was just another hurdle to overcome. He gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. "I believe I have a strong understanding of the legal matters at hand, Your Honor," he replied, his tone calm and measured. "But I'm here to provide the facts, not to impress you with my resume." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Well, we'll see about that," she said, turning her attention to the proceedings. "Let's see if your facts can stand up to the law." Musk took his seat, his posture relaxed, but his mind was already racing ahead. He knew this battle was going to be different. He wasn't just up against a corporation or a competitor this time. He was facing the full weight of the legal system, with a judge who already seemed determined to dismiss him based on little more than his status as a tech billionaire. Judge McKenna was notorious for her bluntness, and today was no different. As she called the case to order, she couldn't help but comment on the sheer absurdity of a case involving a tech mogul like Musk. "Mr. Musk, you're facing accusations of corporate fraud, breach of contract, and misleading investors," she said, her voice rising as she read through the charges. "Your company, SpaceX, is accused of violating multiple agreements with a rival tech firm. You have no shortage of resources, no shortage of legal teams, and yet here you are, trying to explain yourself like any other defendant." The tension in the room was palpable. Musk remained still, his gaze fixed on the judge. He had expected this level of disdain, and he was ready for it. "You may not understand this, Your Honor," he said, his voice steady, "but the complexities of this case extend far beyond what the surface might show. This is not just about a legal dispute, it's about innovation, progress, and how we, as a society, choose to handle those who push boundaries. My companies are at the forefront of that push." Judge McKenna's eyes narrowed, clearly unimpressed. "That may be true, Mr. Musk, but this is a courtroom, not a press conference. You can't just talk your way out of this. This is about facts. This is about what you did and whether or not you broke the law." The words felt like a challenge, but Musk took it in stride. He knew that the legal system was a game of strategy, and he wasn't one to shy away from a challenge. He had built his empire on taking risks and outthinking those who doubted him. This would be no different. As the case unfolded, Musk's legal team presented their opening statements, outlining the defense and the key points they intended to prove. But every time Musk's name was mentioned, Judge McKenna's sharp eyes flicked over to him, her skepticism still visible. She didn't believe he could win this. She didn't believe he understood the law in a way that mattered. But Musk, in his calm and unassuming way, began to notice something that others didn't. While Judge McKenna had been dismissive of him at the start, she couldn't seem to ignore the small details he had brought to the case. The way he phrased his arguments, the clarity in his explanations, there was more to Musk than the world realized. More than just a tech genius, he was a strategist who could see the pieces of the puzzle before they even fell into place. And Musk wasn't going to let Judge McKenna's cynicism be the end of it. He would play the game, his way. At the end of the first day, as the court adjourned, Musk made his way back to his team. They had a lot of work to do, but Musk was focused. This case wasn't about winning in the traditional sense. It was about proving something far more important, proving that even the most unconventional minds could navigate the maze of law. As he stepped into the hallway, his mind raced through every detail of the case, every word that had been spoken. He wasn't just going to beat them with facts. He was going to beat them with something more, something Judge McKenna hadn't counted on. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Elon Musk wasn't always the billionaire tech mogul the world now knew him to be. His story began in Pretoria, South Africa, where he was born to a Canadian mother and a South African father. From the start, Elon's life seemed destined to be different, marked by an intense curiosity about the world around him and an insatiable desire to understand how things worked. Growing up in a small, modest house, Elon wasn't like other kids. While most children played outside, he could often be found buried in books, learning about science, mathematics, and technology. At the age of 10, he taught himself computer programming, eventually creating and selling a video game called Blaster for $500. It was a small achievement, but to Elon, it was proof that his mind worked differently. The world of computers was his playground, and he was just getting started. But despite his genius, life wasn't always kind to him. He had a difficult childhood, marked by a strained relationship with his father and frequent bullying at school. His intelligence set him apart from others, but it also made him a target. The kids at school didn't understand him, and the feeling was mutual. Elon was a loner, a dreamer who didn't quite fit into the typical mold of a young boy from Pretoria. Yet, in the silence of his bedroom, he would dream big, far beyond the confines of his hometown, beyond the reaches of what most people considered possible. At the age of 17, Elon made the bold decision to leave South Africa and pursue a better future in North America. He moved to Canada, where he attended Queen's University, before transferring to the University of Pennsylvania in the United States. The shift from Pretoria to Canada was a pivotal moment in his life, marking the beginning of his journey to break free from the limitations that had always held him back. In the early years of his time in America, Elon lived a humble life, working hard, struggling with finances, and trying to find his place in the world. He was driven by a sense of purpose, though it was unclear at the time just how far that drive would take him. He was determined to make a mark in the world, but he didn't know yet how or where that would happen. The turning point came when he decided to drop out of a PhD program at Stanford University after just 2 days. Elon's instincts told him that the future was not in academia, but in building something revolutionary, something that would change the world forever. It was a decision that would define the rest of his life. With his brother Kimball, he co-founded Zip2, a software company that provided city guides for newspapers. This small venture would eventually sell for $307 million, a figure that Elon would soon turn into an even more ambitious project. But it wasn't just the money that motivated Elon. It was the vision, the desire to push humanity to greater heights. After the sale of Zip2, Musk turned his focus to the future, setting his sights on electric vehicles and space exploration. He co-founded X.com, which would later become PayPal, and turned his attention to the budding field of electric cars with Tesla. But it was SpaceX, his ultimate creation, that would put him on a path towards something far beyond what most could ever imagine, the colonization of Mars. Throughout the years, Musk faced enormous challenges. There were moments when it seemed like all his ventures might crumble. He almost lost Tesla to bankruptcy, and SpaceX suffered multiple failed rocket launches. Yet, through all the setbacks, Musk remained resolute. He believed in the impossible. And when everyone else doubted him, that belief became his greatest strength. It was his resilience, his ability to weather storms, that set him apart from the many other entrepreneurs who came and went. But despite all of his success, there was a side of Musk few people ever saw, the side that struggled with personal relationships, with the weight of his constant ambition, and with the loneliness that often accompanied the burden of being at the top. Musk was married 3 times, twice to actress Tallulah Riley, and had 6 children. But with each marriage and relationship, he struggled to find balance. His mind was always on the next big project, the next big challenge, leaving little room for anything else. In the courtroom that day, Musk's mind was sharp. His intense focus was unmatched, as it always had been. But this time, the challenge was different. The battle he was about to fight wasn't just against a rival corporation, it was against a system that seemed to underestimate him at every turn. It was against people who, like so many others in his past, doubted his ability to navigate the intricacies of the law. But Musk was used to that feeling. It was the same feeling he had when he first started Zip2, when he was laughed at for trying to put electric cars on the road, or when he was told that private space travel was a fool's dream. As Musk sat in the courtroom, he could feel the familiar weight of determination settle over him. He wasn't just fighting for SpaceX, Tesla, or even his reputation. He was fighting for the very idea that had driven him from a small boy in South Africa to the world-changing inventor he had become. This wasn't just a case about legalities, it was about proving that thinking outside the box, that challenging the norm, was exactly what the world needed. And this time, the judge standing in front of him, Judge Jessica McKenna, was no different from the many others who had underestimated him before. Her skepticism was a challenge, yes. But to Musk, it was fuel. And just like in all the other moments of his life, he was ready to prove that when it came to pushing boundaries, there was no limit, no matter how impossible it seemed. The next morning, the courtroom was buzzing with anticipation. News outlets were packed outside, all vying for a chance to report on the latest twist in the high-profile case involving Elon Musk. Inside, the atmosphere was tense, almost suffocating, as the second day of the trial began. Judge McKenna entered the room, her eyes scanning the crowd with a sharpness that could cut through steel. There was a subtle shift in her demeanor now. Yesterday, she had been dismissive, almost mocking. Today, there was a quiet uncertainty in her posture. As much as she wanted to maintain control over the proceedings, there was an undeniable feeling that something was different. Something about Musk seemed to unsettle her, something she hadn't anticipated. As the judge took her seat, Musk remained cool and composed, ready for whatever the day would throw at him. His legal team, led by the sharp and calculated attorney Maria Simmons, had spent hours overnight preparing for this moment. They knew the stakes were higher than ever. This wasn't just a courtroom, it was a battlefield, and Musk wasn't about to back down. "Let's get this day started," Judge McKenna announced, her gavel striking sharply. "Mr. Musk, you may present your defense." The court was already abuzz with murmurs. Musk had remained mostly quiet the previous day, letting his legal team handle the bulk of the arguments. But today, it was his turn to speak directly. Musk stood up and adjusted his glasses, his piercing blue eyes scanning the room as if he were already seeing the problem from every angle. "Your Honor," he began, his voice calm but firm, "what we're dealing with here is a matter of perception versus reality. What's being presented as a case of fraud and corporate misconduct is, in fact, an attempt to thwart progress." He paused, letting his words settle in the air. McKenna's face remained impassive, but Musk could see the flicker of curiosity behind her eyes. She wasn't ready to admit it, but she was starting to listen. "I've built companies that aim to change the world," Musk continued, his tone steady but with an edge of passion that couldn't be faked. Tesla is working to eliminate fossil fuels. SpaceX is building the infrastructure to take humanity beyond Earth. These aren't just businesses, they're lifelines to the future. And yet, here I am, being accused of deceiving investors, manipulating stock prices, and breaking the law. These allegations are not only false, they're an insult to the very vision I've worked tirelessly to create. His words hung in the room, leaving a palpable silence in their wake. It was rare for Musk to speak directly in court, but when he did, it was with a clarity that seemed to cut through the fog of legal jargon and corporate back and forth. Judge McKenna, as tough as she was, couldn't completely mask her intrigue. Mr. Musk, your defense sounds idealistic, to say the least. But this is not a conversation about ideals. It's about facts. It's about the evidence before us. Do you have evidence that disproves the accusations made against you? Musk didn't hesitate. Yes, Your Honor, he replied confidently. I'll let the numbers speak for themselves. I'll show you the contracts, the communications, and the internal documents that prove this is all a misunderstanding. But more importantly, I'll show you something no one else has considered, the bigger picture. The judge raised an eyebrow. The bigger picture, she repeated, clearly unconvinced. I suggest you stick to the facts, Mr. Musk. Maria Simmons, who had been silently observing, quickly picked up on Musk's momentum. She stood and addressed the court. Your Honor, Mr. Musk's companies are under constant scrutiny. As a result, every single action taken by Tesla, SpaceX, and other ventures has been done with the utmost transparency. The very nature of innovation, especially in fields like space exploration and electric vehicles, means there will be growing pains. But that doesn't mean fraud is involved. McKenna didn't seem to be fully convinced, but she couldn't dismiss the sharpness in Musk's argument. The tension was escalating, and she had to make a decision about how to proceed. The courtroom was growing more divided, with Musk supporters and critics both growing louder by the second. Judge McKenna's skepticism grew as the hours passed. She had come into the trial with the firm belief that Musk's celebrity status could only be used to shield him from reality for so long. But now, as the defense slowly unfolded, she was beginning to question if she had underestimated him. Maybe there was more to this case than she had initially thought. The rising conflict wasn't just between Musk and the law. It was between two ideologies, one that believed in the unrelenting drive of progress at any cost and one that valued the careful adherence to the rules, no matter how much they might hinder innovation. Outside the courtroom, news outlets were running wild with the story. Social media exploded as clips of Musk's impassioned speech spread like wildfire. The world was watching, and opinions were split. Some saw Musk as a misunderstood genius, while others believed he was a dangerous egomaniac who played by his own rules. But as the trial wore on, it was clear that the tension wasn't just about the facts. It was about something deeper, a battle of wills, of ideologies, and perhaps even a clash of personalities. Musk was fighting not only for his companies, but for his vision of the future. And in that courtroom, it seemed like the future of innovation itself was on trial. As the day ended and the court adjourned, Musk sat back in his chair, his mind whirring with possibilities. The rising conflict wasn't just a legal matter, it was personal. He had faced opposition before, but this time, it felt different. The stakes were higher than ever, and the opponents weren't just faceless corporations or politicians. They were people who didn't understand him, didn't understand the fire that burned within him to change the world. But Musk knew one thing for certain, he wasn't going to back down. No matter what the courtroom threw at him, he would continue to fight, just as he had fought every other challenge in his life. The following morning, the courtroom was filled with anticipation. The previous day's events had already shaken the legal landscape, and today, the stakes had only grown higher. Elon Musk stood at the center of it all, more determined than ever, as the battle for his companies and vision entered a new phase. Judge McKenna had already made it clear that she wasn't going to take Musk's defense at face value. She needed more than rhetoric, more than conviction, she needed undeniable proof. The defense would need to dig deeper, not just into the accusations but into the very soul of Musk's mission. The morning began with the prosecution taking the floor. Richard Walters, a seasoned lawyer with decades of experience in corporate law, stepped forward. His reputation was built on his ability to expose weaknesses, to find cracks in the armor of the wealthiest and most influential individuals. And Musk, despite his confidence, was far from invulnerable. Walters was methodical, careful with every word, as he presented evidence that seemed to paint a damning picture of Musk's actions. He spoke about Tesla's early stock manipulation, SpaceX's controversial contracts, and Musk's infamous tweets, claiming they were calculated moves designed to deceive investors and inflate stock prices. These aren't just innocent mistakes or misunderstood statements, Walters said, his voice cutting through the tension in the room. These were deliberate acts of manipulation. And they were done with the express purpose of benefiting Mr. Musk at the expense of the investors who trusted him. Musk listened closely, his face impassive. He had heard these accusations before, but now they were being brought with a level of precision that could sway the court if he wasn't careful. His mind raced, trying to anticipate Walters' next move. This wasn't just a defense of his companies, it was a defense of everything he had worked for, everything he believed in. The pressure was suffocating, but Musk had faced far worse odds. He wasn't about to fold now. As Walters laid out his case, he revealed email exchanges, financial documents, and even personal communications between Musk and investors. Some of it seemed benign, but a few lines caught Musk's attention, lines that, if taken out of context, could easily be twisted into something far more sinister. One such email, in particular, stood out. Musk had written to a group of investors, boasting about Tesla's imminent success and how the stock was poised to soar. The words seemed harmless, even optimistic, but Walters emphasized the timing, an email sent right before Tesla's stock price shot up dramatically. The question Walters posed was simple: was Musk manipulating the situation to his advantage? Musk's mind flashed to the late nights he had spent with his teams, brainstorming ways to push the boundaries of what was possible. He had never intended to mislead anyone, his words, though bold, were fueled by his unshakable belief in Tesla's future. Yet, in the eyes of the law, those words had become ammunition in a dangerous game. Judge McKenna's face remained neutral, but Musk could sense the shift. He could feel her skepticism growing. The defense would need to do more than just deny the accusations, they had to turn the tide in their favor, to show that the narrative the prosecution had constructed was one built on a misunderstanding of Musk's vision. And so, with his defense team ready, Musk stood to address the court. The room fell silent as he walked to the podium, his eyes narrowing with focus. He had never been one to shy away from a challenge, but today, the challenge was unlike any other. "Your Honor, members of the jury," Musk began, his voice steady but full of conviction. "What you are hearing from Mr. Walters is a picture of what he wants you to believe. But it is not the full story. It is not the truth." He paused, his eyes sweeping the courtroom. "The truth is, I have never manipulated anyone. I've never deliberately deceived investors. What I have done is something far harder. I've dared to think big. I've dared to dream of a future where humanity isn't dependent on fossil fuels, where we can reach the stars, where we can make the impossible possible." Musk's words were measured, but his passion was undeniable. He continued, his voice growing stronger with each sentence. "Tesla has always been about more than just electric cars. It's about the future of the planet. SpaceX has always been about more than just rockets. It's about humanity's survival beyond Earth. And every decision I've made has been to further that vision." The courtroom was tense, every person in the room hanging on his every word. Musk knew that the next few minutes would be critical. If he couldn't convince the court, the damage could be irreversible. "I admit, I've made mistakes. I've said things in the heat of the moment that, in hindsight, weren't the best way to communicate. But that's not the same as deception. It's not the same as fraud. I've been open about my vision, about what I believe in. And if that has sometimes ruffled feathers, so be it. But it has never been about manipulating stock prices or taking advantage of investors. It's been about something much bigger. The courtroom was silent, the weight of Musk's words hanging in the air. For the first time since the trial began, Judge McKenna shifted in her seat, her expression softening just a fraction. It was as if she was starting to see Musk not just as a wealthy businessman but as the visionary he had always claimed to be. His defense team jumped in, presenting the evidence Musk had promised, the contracts, the internal emails, the communications with investors, all demonstrating that the decisions made at Tesla and SpaceX were not only legitimate but were part of a larger strategy to push the boundaries of technology. The tide was turning. What had started as a series of accusations against Musk had now become a question of whether the law could truly understand the scope of his vision. Could it reconcile the realities of business with the bold aspirations that Musk had pursued his entire life? And then, just as Musk felt the tide of the case begin to shift in his favor, Walters made a calculated move. He pointed to the infamous tweet Musk had sent out, the one that had caused the most controversy, the tweet about taking Tesla private at $420 per share. It was a moment that had sparked a firestorm of outrage and legal scrutiny. It was the moment that, for many, defined Musk's reckless disregard for the law. This tweet, Walters began, is not a product of inspiration. It is not visionary thinking. It is the product of a man who was willing to manipulate the stock market to benefit himself. And this, Your Honor, is the heart of the matter. The room went silent again. The tweet was a weapon that Musk couldn't easily deflect. But Musk, calm as ever, knew that he wasn't done. The battle had only just begun, and he had one more piece to play. Your Honor, Musk said, his voice unwavering, that tweet was a mistake. It was a decision made in haste. But it was never intended to mislead. The truth is, I have always been transparent about my intentions. And I have always made decisions that I believe are in the best interest of my companies and the future of humanity. This isn't about stock prices. This is about the future of the world. The courtroom was still. The battle lines had been drawn, but the war was far from over. And as the day came to a close, everyone knew one thing for sure: Elon Musk wasn't going down without a fight. The following days were a blur of strategy, rebuttals, and intense legal wrangling. But it was clear to everyone in the courtroom that the trial was reaching its most critical juncture. As the prosecution and defense exchanged their final blows, the air was thick with tension. Musk, despite his calm exterior, felt the weight of the moment pressing on him. This wasn't just about defending his companies or even his fortune. This was a defining moment, one that could change the course of his future. Judge McKenna had already made it clear that she was going to take a long time deliberating over the evidence. The battle over Musk's intentions and the allegations of market manipulation had hit a boiling point. But for Musk, there was one final hurdle to overcome, proving that his intentions had always been rooted in a desire for progress, not personal gain. On the morning of the final arguments, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. The crowd was hushed as both sides prepared to deliver their closing statements. As the clock ticked down toward the final hour of the trial, Musk sat quietly in the defense's seat, his mind racing through the events that had led him here. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest, his palms slightly damp as he fought to keep his composure. It wasn't just the weight of the trial that was overwhelming, it was the realization that everything he had built could be torn down in a single moment. He thought about the long hours in the lab at Tesla, pushing the boundaries of electric vehicles. He thought about the engineers and scientists at SpaceX, working tirelessly to make human space travel a reality. And he thought about the countless obstacles he had faced along the way, challenges that had seemed insurmountable at the time, but that he had overcome with the same stubborn determination that had always driven him. But today, it was different. Today, the world was watching, and the stakes had never been higher. As the defense team rose to make their final statement, Maria Simmons took the podium, her eyes locked on Judge McKenna. She was as calm and composed as ever, but beneath her measured tone, there was an unmistakable fire. "Your Honor," Maria began, "this trial has brought us to a point where we must ask ourselves not only what the law says, but what is right. And I submit to you that Mr. Musk's actions, while bold and unorthodox, have never been done with the intent to deceive. His mission has always been clear: to innovate, to push the boundaries of what's possible, and to make the world a better place." She paused, her gaze shifting toward Musk before returning to the judge. "This is not a trial about stock prices. This is not a trial about tweets. This is a trial about the future of innovation. And the question we must ask ourselves is, do we want to stifle innovation, to punish those who dare to dream big, or do we want to embrace the potential for a brighter future?" Maria's words echoed through the room, resonating with many in the audience. For the first time in the trial, it seemed that the tide was fully turning in Musk's favor. His defense had always been about more than just proving his innocence, it had been about convincing the world that his vision was worth fighting for. And now, the message was being received loud and clear. But the emotional climax of the trial was yet to come. As Maria finished her closing statement, Musk was called to the stand once more. The weight of the moment was suffocating, but Musk knew what he had to do. He had to speak not just as a CEO or a billionaire, but as a man who had built his life around the pursuit of something greater than himself. He stood and walked slowly to the witness stand, his every step measured, his eyes focused. As he took his seat, the courtroom fell into a heavy silence. "Your Honor," Musk began, his voice steady but tinged with emotion, "I know that what I've done, what we've all done at Tesla and SpaceX, is unconventional. It's bold. It's risky. But it's also necessary. The world is changing, and we cannot afford to wait for permission to innovate. We can't wait for the old ways to catch up. If we do, we'll be left behind." His voice grew stronger, and for the first time, he allowed himself to show some of the emotion he had kept so tightly under control throughout the trial. "I've made mistakes. I've said things I shouldn't have said. I've acted in ways that may have been reckless. But I did it all because I believe, that the future is worth fighting for. The future of humanity depends on the choices we make today. And I would rather risk everything to build something that could change the world than play it safe and watch as the world passes us by." The room was still, as if time itself had frozen in place. Musk's words had struck a chord, not just with the judge but with everyone present. This wasn't just a defense, it was a declaration of purpose, a plea for understanding. Judge McKenna's expression softened, just for a moment, as she looked at Musk. It was the first time in the entire trial that she had shown any sign of empathy. The emotional climax was undeniable. The air was thick with the weight of Musk's words, and the tension in the room had reached its peak. It was clear that this was not just about legality or corporate policies, it was about a larger question: could the world afford to punish those who dared to dream? Musk took a deep breath, his mind racing as he realized just how much was riding on these final moments. His entire life, his legacy, his companies, everything he had worked for, was on the line. The judge leaned forward, her fingers steepled as she considered Musk's words. The courtroom held its breath, the tension almost unbearable. After what felt like an eternity, Judge McKenna spoke, her voice low but firm. "I've heard what you've said, Mr. Musk. And I must admit, your argument has caused me to reconsider everything I thought I knew about this case." Musk could feel the weight of her words as they hung in the air. This was it, the moment that could change everything. However, Judge McKenna continued, her voice cutting through the tension, "There are still matters that require deeper scrutiny. This trial is far from over, and I need time to deliberate." Musk nodded, knowing that the journey was far from finished. The courtroom buzzed with speculation, but he knew that no matter the outcome, he had done what he set out to do. He had made his case, not just as a businessman, but as someone who believed in the impossible. And now, all he could do was wait for the verdict. The days following Musk's emotional testimony were filled with an unspoken sense of uncertainty. While the courtroom had quieted down after the dramatic closing statements, the true weight of the trial had yet to be fully realized. Everyone knew that Judge McKenna's decision would not only determine Musk's fate but also set a precedent for future cases involving powerful tech moguls and the blurry lines of corporate governance. As Musk stepped out of the courthouse on the final day of arguments, he couldn't help but feel a mix of exhaustion and resolve. The past weeks had drained him emotionally, mentally, and physically. The constant pressure of being in the spotlight, the relentless legal battles, the toll it had taken on his relationships, everything had built up to this final moment. But despite it all, Musk knew one thing: he couldn't back down now. It was a late afternoon when Musk sat in his office, reviewing the latest developments in the case. His team was still working around the clock, preparing for any possible outcome, but Musk couldn't shake the feeling that, regardless of what happened in court, something had shifted within him. He had spoken his truth. The world had seen a side of him that was raw, vulnerable, and deeply human. And that had, perhaps, been the most powerful weapon in his arsenal. For years, Musk had been viewed as a genius, a visionary with an unrelenting drive to push the boundaries of what was possible. But in that courtroom, he had been forced to show a different side of himself, a man who questioned his own actions, who acknowledged his flaws, and who sought redemption. It was a side of him he had long kept hidden behind a curtain of success and ambition. As the days dragged on, the anticipation for the judge's ruling grew. The media buzzed with speculation, and pundits across the world weighed in on the trial's impact. Some believed Musk had finally met his match, while others argued that his passion and drive were the very qualities that would ultimately save him. But for Musk, the public opinion mattered little. What mattered was the truth, and that truth, he knew, had been laid bare for all to see. Then, one morning, the phone call came. "Mr. Musk, the ruling has been handed down," his lawyer, Maria Simmons, said. Her voice was steady, but there was an underlying note of anticipation. "It's time." Musk's heart skipped a beat as he stood up from his desk. This was the moment he had been dreading and anticipating all at once. He had prepared for every scenario, every possible outcome, but nothing could fully prepare him for the verdict. He was told to meet with his legal team in the courtroom one last time. As Musk arrived, he could feel the weight of the moment in the air. The courtroom was packed, journalists, onlookers, and supporters had all gathered for this final moment. The atmosphere was tense, thick with the buzz of anticipation. Judge McKenna entered the courtroom, her expression unreadable as she took her seat. The room fell silent as the proceedings began. Everyone was waiting for her final words, for the ruling that would determine whether Elon Musk would walk free, unscathed, or face significant consequences for his actions. "Mr. Musk," Judge McKenna began, her voice calm but carrying the gravity of the moment, "I have listened to the arguments from both sides, and I have reviewed all the evidence presented. This has been a complex and difficult case, but after much deliberation, I have reached a decision." Musk held his breath, his mind racing as he prepared himself for the worst. Yet, a part of him clung to hope that his argument had been enough, that his sincerity had been recognized, and that the judge would understand the true nature of his intentions. "The charges brought against you, Mr. Musk, are serious, and the court acknowledges that mistakes were made. However, it is clear to me that these mistakes were not made with the intent to deceive, manipulate, or defraud. Rather, they were the result of ambition to change the world and push the boundaries of innovation." Musk felt a flood of relief wash over him. But the judge's words weren't over. He steadied himself for whatever was to come next. "Therefore," Judge McKenna continued, "I find that while you may have acted recklessly at times, your actions do not warrant the severe consequences that have been sought by the prosecution. The court will impose a fine, and you are hereby required to make restitution to those affected by your actions. However, I do not believe that a ruling in favor of the prosecution would serve the greater good, nor would it further the principles of innovation and progress. A collective sigh of relief spread through Musk's team as the words sank in. The room erupted in muted applause, though Musk remained still, processing the full weight of the ruling. Mr. Musk, Judge McKenna concluded, the court acknowledges the potential that you and your companies have to change the world. You are a man of great vision, but with that vision comes great responsibility. I urge you to learn from the mistakes of the past and proceed with caution moving forward. The court hopes that this case serves as a reminder to all that even the most ambitious endeavors must remain grounded in integrity. As the ruling was read, Musk allowed himself a quiet exhale. The worst had been avoided. He had been given a second chance, not just in the eyes of the law, but in the eyes of the world. Later that day, Musk stood on the steps of the courthouse, surrounded by reporters and photographers eager to capture his reaction. The weight of the trial was finally lifting, but the journey was far from over. He had learned something invaluable through this process, something he hadn't fully realized until the final moments of his testimony. The pursuit of innovation, the drive to push the boundaries of what was possible, had always been Musk's primary focus. But now, he understood more deeply the importance of responsibility, of ensuring that the risks he took were measured and that the consequences of those risks were fully understood. Looking out over the crowd, Musk knew that this was only the beginning. The world had watched him falter, but it had also watched him rise. His vision was still intact, and he would continue to fight for the future he believed in. But he would do so with a renewed sense of humility, aware that even the boldest dreams must be balanced with a commitment to integrity. As the flashbulbs of cameras popped and the questions poured in, Musk stood tall, his mind already turning to the next challenge ahead. The world had just seen a different side of him, one that was vulnerable, yet resolute, and it had made all the difference. The ruling had been made. The case was over, but Musk knew that life, especially for someone like him, didn't simply stop for a legal victory. The courtroom was behind him, but the work ahead of him was endless. The spotlight had faded for now, but the real challenge was in the coming days, weeks, and months as the fallout from the trial reverberated throughout the tech industry and the media. Musk returned to his usual routine, but the weight of the experience still hung over him. He had narrowly escaped disaster, but the cost of that near miss wasn't something that could be easily shaken off. The public would move on to the next big story soon enough, but Musk knew that his actions, his decisions, and his words from here on out would be under even greater scrutiny. In the quiet moments between meetings, when his mind wandered to the trial and the intense emotions he had experienced, Musk reflected on what had truly changed in him. His ability to stand up in that courtroom, vulnerable and honest about his mistakes, had taught him something invaluable about leadership. It wasn't just about winning or losing, it was about accountability. He had to own his actions, both the good and the bad, and accept that sometimes, even the greatest minds could falter. As he sat at his desk in the SpaceX headquarters, staring at the many screens in front of him, Musk's mind kept drifting back to his mission. The future of humanity. The future of space exploration. Tesla's fight to push the envelope on electric cars. These were the things that had driven him since the beginning, things that kept him awake at night, driving his passion for innovation. He knew that the world needed the progress he was chasing, even if the road to get there was never smooth. Maria Simmons, his lead counsel, entered his office. "You've got a meeting with the SpaceX board in 15 minutes, she said, her voice sharp and professional, as always. "But I thought we should talk about the media fallout from the case." "It's not over yet." Musk nodded, rubbing his temples. He had been avoiding the media frenzy ever since the trial's conclusion. His phone had been flooded with calls, messages, and requests for interviews. Every network wanted a statement. Every journalist wanted to hear his take on the case, the decision, and what it meant for the future of technology. But Musk had made the decision to stay silent for a while, at least until the noise died down. "I'll deal with it soon," he said, his voice distant. "The focus should be on the work ahead. We've got bigger things to worry about." Maria gave him a pointed look, clearly unconvinced. "I know, but the public perception of you right now could impact everything: Tesla, SpaceX, even your personal brand. The world is watching to see what you'll do next. You've already made your case in court, but now it's time to make your case to the public." Musk leaned back in his chair, looking out the window at the sprawling facility outside. There was always work to be done. Always a new mission on the horizon. SpaceX was pushing forward with the next steps in Mars exploration, and Tesla had new models in the works that could revolutionize the automotive industry once again. But Maria was right. The world was watching him, and he had a responsibility not only to his companies but to the people who had supported him and believed in his vision. "Fine," Musk said after a long pause. "Let's schedule something. I'll do a live interview or something. It's time to clear the air." Maria smiled faintly. "I'll get on it." The meeting with the board of SpaceX was productive, as usual. Musk had always surrounded himself with people who were not only highly skilled but who shared his passion for the future. They discussed the progress of the Mars program, the upcoming launches, and the technical advancements that were bringing them closer to their goal of making life multiplanetary. Despite the trial's emotional toll, Musk felt a renewed sense of purpose as he talked to his team. This was what he lived for, this was where his heart truly lay. After the meeting, Musk took a walk around the SpaceX facility, the cool breeze blowing across the parking lot. The massive rocket ships looming in the distance were a constant reminder of what he was working toward. As he passed the engineers and technicians in the hangars, he smiled at the familiar faces. These were the people who believed in him, who had followed him into the unknown and dared to dream of a future beyond Earth. Despite all the challenges, Musk knew there was still so much to be done. The trial may have been a massive distraction, but it hadn't changed the course of history that he was trying to create. The road ahead was just as challenging, just as full of obstacles, but it was a road worth walking. That evening, as Musk sat down in his living room, he reflected on how far he had come. The trial had been a crucible, a test of not only his legal acumen but of his character. He had faced public mockery, intense scrutiny, and his own inner doubts. But now, with the ruling behind him, he could see the bigger picture again. The phone rang, breaking his thoughts. It was a reporter from a major news outlet. He picked up the call, bracing himself for the inevitable questions. "Mr. Musk, thank you for taking my call," the reporter said. "I know you've been laying low, but we'd love to hear your thoughts now that the trial is over. What's next for you? How do you plan to rebuild your public image after everything that's happened?" Musk took a deep breath before speaking. "The trial wasn't just about me. It was about the future, about the risks we take when we try to change the world. The mistakes I made, I own them. But I will not let them define who I am or the work I do. What's next is what has always been next, pushing the boundaries of what's possible. Space exploration, electric vehicles, and sustainability. That's what I'm focused on. And if people can see the value in that, then that's all I need." The reporter was quiet for a moment, clearly processing his response. "But you can't deny that the public is divided on your actions. Some see you as a visionary, others as a reckless billionaire. How do you respond to that?" Musk's response was firm and calm. "I respond by doing the work. Actions speak louder than words. People will judge me, but my companies, my work, they will speak for themselves. I've been criticized for doing things differently, but that's the only way to create real change. And I won't apologize for that." The conversation ended shortly after, and Musk leaned back in his chair, feeling a sense of calm settle over him. The road ahead was long and fraught with challenges, but he was ready. The trial had been a momentary obstacle, but his vision had always been bigger than any setback. He stood up, walking to the window to look out at the city. Tomorrow, he would wake up, and the journey would continue. In the days following the trial's conclusion, the media circus surrounding Musk began to grow at an alarming rate. Headlines flooded across social media platforms, TV news networks, and tech blogs. The world had been watching the courtroom drama unfold, and now it was waiting for Musk's next move. The news cycle churned faster than ever, and Musk had little time to pause and catch his breath. Though the court ruling had been a partial victory, Musk knew the media wasn't interested in celebrating his resilience. They wanted drama, they wanted scandal. They loved the chaos of it all. Every day, there were new angles, some sympathetic, some critical, and some downright hostile. The general narrative seemed to have split into two extremes. Some hailed him as a misunderstood genius, while others viewed him as a reckless billionaire playing with fire. Despite his reputation as an innovator, Musk had never been comfortable with the spotlight. He had learned early on that the media often took his words and actions out of context, manipulating them to fit their own stories. But this time was different. The trial had exposed a vulnerability in him that he hadn't shown to the world before. He had allowed the curtain to fall, revealing his inner doubts and regrets. And in doing so, he had opened himself up to even more intense scrutiny. One morning, Musk woke up to a storm of notifications on his phone. A new story had broken, one that claimed Musk's public image had been irreparably damaged by the trial. The headline read, "Elon Musk, a visionary, or just another billionaire with too much power?" It was an opinion piece, written by a well-known journalist, and it painted Musk in a particularly unflattering light. The article claimed that Musk's legal troubles had revealed cracks in his character, questioning his ability to lead his companies in the future. The writer pointed to his behavior during the trial, his moments of defensiveness and emotional outbursts, as evidence of a man who lacked the maturity and control to handle the enormous responsibilities of his empire. Musk's first instinct was to ignore it. The article, like so many before it, was just noise. But something about the tone of the piece lingered in his mind. The questions it raised felt more pointed, more personal. Was he truly the man the world believed him to be? Had his ambition, his drive for change, blinded him to the consequences of his actions? As he sat down at his desk that morning, Musk found himself staring at the screen, his finger hovering over the keyboard. He could easily fire off a tweet, put the journalist in their place, and move on. That was his default response, to lash out, to defend himself, to fight back. But this time, something was different. Maybe it was the trial. Maybe it was the emotional toll it had taken on him. Whatever the reason, Musk found himself considering a new approach. He took a deep breath and, instead of responding with anger, he began drafting a statement. Not a defensive one, not an apology, but a reflection on everything that had happened. He wrote about the trial, the lessons he had learned, and the importance of being held accountable. He acknowledged his flaws but also reiterated his commitment to the greater mission, to the future of space exploration, to the fight against climate change, and to creating a better world through innovation. It wasn't a perfect response, but it felt honest. It felt real. He hit send. The statement Musk released that day was unlike anything the public had ever seen from him. He didn't shy away from acknowledging the complexity of the situation. He didn't spin it into a narrative of being a misunderstood hero or a victim of the system. Instead, he presented himself as a human being who had made mistakes, but who was still committed to changing the world in the best way he knew how. The response was immediate and mixed. On one hand, there were those who praised him for his honesty and self-awareness. Some admired his ability to step outside of his ego and show vulnerability, believing that it would allow him to grow and become a better leader. They respected his willingness to take responsibility for his actions without resorting to excuses or justifications. On the other hand, the critics were quick to seize upon Musk's admission of fault as proof that he was unfit to lead his companies. They pointed to his emotional statements during the trial and suggested that Musk's public self-reflection was just a PR move, another attempt to repair his tarnished image. The media continued to churn, but Musk stayed focused. He knew that he couldn't control the narrative, but he could control the work. The vision he had for the future hadn't changed. His companies were still working on groundbreaking projects. SpaceX was closer than ever to making Mars a reality. Tesla's innovation in electric vehicles was paving the way for a more sustainable future. But now, more than ever, Musk knew that he had to balance his ambitions with a deeper sense of responsibility. His journey wasn't just about conquering space or revolutionizing industries, it was about leading by example. A few weeks later, Musk found himself sitting across from Maria Simmons once again. This time, their conversation wasn't about legal strategies or media responses. Instead, they were discussing the next phase of SpaceX's mission, the colonization of Mars. Musk had always been obsessed with the idea of humanity becoming a multiplanetary species, but now he was seeing it through a different lens. The idea of creating a sustainable future, of ensuring that humanity could thrive no matter what happened on Earth, had become more urgent. The next mission is critical, Musk said, looking at Maria across the table. We're getting closer to making it happen. We can't afford to get distracted. We need to focus on the long term. Maria nodded, fully aware of the stakes. But how do you handle everything that's been happening in the media? How do we keep SpaceX focused when you're being pulled in 1,000 directions? Musk leaned back in his chair, his fingers drumming lightly on the table. We stay focused. The media is noise. The work is what matters. The only way forward is to keep innovating, to keep building. The world will see our results. There was a moment of silence before Maria spoke again. And what about the public's perception of you? Will they continue to trust you? Musk paused. The question hung in the air. Trust. It was something that, until recently, had been taken for granted. But now, he understood its value more than ever. It wasn't just about his reputation, it was about the people who had believed in his vision and the teams who worked tirelessly to make it a reality. We'll earn it back, he said finally, his voice steady. One step at a time. As he walked out of the meeting, the weight of the world was still on his shoulders, but he had come to terms with it. The storm might rage around him, but as long as he kept his eyes on the stars, and on the people who believed in him, he would find his way forward. As the media storm settled into a quieter hum, Musk found himself grappling with a new kind of pressure, one that was both familiar and alien. The public's response to his statement had been mixed, and he had done his best to compartmentalize the noise. But despite his ability to block out distractions and focus on his work, the weight of leadership was becoming more difficult to bear. Every move he made, every decision, seemed to carry more significance now. He wasn't just a businessman anymore, he was a symbol. A symbol of risk-taking, innovation, and, for some, of unchecked ambition. It was a mantle he hadn't exactly asked for, but it had been thrust upon him the moment he decided to defy the odds and challenge the status quo. Musk walked through the halls of SpaceX's headquarters, flanked by engineers and scientists who spoke in excited whispers about the next steps for the Mars program. There was a sense of purpose here that was almost palpable, a collective energy focused on the singular goal of human space exploration. Yet, even amidst the passion and enthusiasm of his team, Musk couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that something was missing. His mind wandered back to the trial, the mockery in the courtroom, the sharp barbs from the judge, the critical headlines in the press. It all felt like a blur now, but the scars were still there. His reputation, once largely untouchable, was now subject to intense scrutiny. More than ever, Musk felt the pressure of his role, not just as a CEO, but as a beacon for those who believed in the possibility of a better future. He found himself spending more time alone in his office, staring at screens full of numbers and data, the endless technical reports for the next launch, the progress of Tesla's new vehicle models, and the updates on the AI research for Neuralink. These were his escapes, his constant distractions from the deeper, more existential questions that haunted him. A knock on the door broke his reverie. Maria Simmons stepped in, looking more serious than usual. "Got a minute?" she asked, her voice neutral but with an underlying urgency. Musk nodded. "Of course. What's on your mind?" Maria sat across from him, her hands folded on the desk. We've been getting some pushback from key investors, especially after your statement. A few of them are questioning your leadership and the potential impact this case might have on the long-term future of SpaceX and Tesla. Musk's heart sank. He had been expecting this. The corporate world was ruthless. Investors didn't care about vulnerabilities, they cared about results. And the risk of him becoming a liability in the eyes of major stakeholders was a reality he had to face. I knew it was coming, he said, rubbing the bridge of his nose. But we can't stop now. These companies, this work, it's bigger than any one person. I agree, Maria said. But the question is, how do we make sure that these challenges don't derail everything we've built? There's a lot of pressure on you to prove that you're still capable of leading these companies through the turbulence. Musk leaned back in his chair, his fingers drumming on the desk. We'll keep doing what we do best, innovating. We keep our eyes on the goal. The long-term goal. Mars. Clean energy. Autonomous transportation. These are the things that matter. Maria met his gaze, her expression softening. I know that's what you believe. But the world's watching you differently now. Your next move could determine how the story ends. Musk was silent for a moment, weighing her words. The pressure was mounting, and he could feel the weight of the world on his shoulders. But it wasn't fear that he felt. It was something more complex, an understanding that leadership, true leadership, required more than just brilliance and vision. It required resilience, humility, and, perhaps most importantly, the ability to adapt. Finally, he spoke. Tell the investors I'll meet with them personally. We'll discuss what comes next, what we're doing to push the envelope even further. I'll reassure them. And I'll show them why we're still the future. Maria gave him a tight nod, though there was a flicker of concern in her eyes. She knew Musk's confidence, but she also knew the stakes were higher than ever. I'll set it up, she said, standing to leave. And, Elon, remember to take care of yourself too. The media and the investors aren't the only ones who need to see you strong. You need to see it too. He offered her a slight smile. I'm fine. I'll be ready. As she left, Musk turned back to the window. The sprawling complex outside, the rocket prototypes, the engineers, everything was exactly as it had always been. But he couldn't ignore the feeling that something profound had changed. The stakes had been raised, and the path ahead was no longer just about achieving technical feats. It was about proving to the world that he could still be the leader they needed him to be. Later that week, the meeting with the investors took place in a sleek conference room at SpaceX's headquarters. The investors, a group of well-dressed, no-nonsense professionals, sat in front of Musk, their expressions guarded. The tension in the room was palpable, and Musk knew that they were expecting him to come up with answers, not just about the future of his companies, but about his own leadership. Musk stood at the head of the room, his usual charisma tempered with a newfound sense of humility. He wasn't here to deliver a grand vision for the future. Instead, he was here to prove that, despite the chaos and the challenges, he still had the capacity to lead these companies to even greater heights. I know some of you have concerns, he began, his voice steady but sincere. I understand why the trial and the media coverage have raised questions. But I want to be clear about one thing, what we're doing at SpaceX, at Tesla, at Neuralink, it's not just about me. It's about the teams, the vision, and the work we're all doing together. He paused, letting his words settle in. The investors exchanged glances, but none spoke. I'll admit, I've made mistakes, Musk continued. But every step of this journey has been about pushing the boundaries, about doing what others said was impossible. And I won't stop now. I'll lead these companies to the next level. And I'll do it with the same commitment, the same passion, and the same willingness to take risks that have gotten us this far. The room was silent for a moment, but then one of the investors, a sharp-eyed man named Thomas Riker, leaned forward. Elon, Riker said, his tone measured, we believe in your vision. But your ability to execute under pressure is what separates the great from the good. And that's what we need to see now more than ever. If you can do that, if you can prove that you're still the leader we've always believed in, then the future is yours. Musk nodded, his mind already shifting to the next challenge. This was the moment he had been preparing for, the moment where he would prove that no trial, no media frenzy, no personal setback could derail his vision for the future. He wasn't just building companies. He was shaping the future of humanity itself. "I will prove it," Musk said, his voice firm. "And we will make history." Elon Musk sat in the quiet of his office, alone once again. The meeting with the investors had been a success in some ways, but the battle wasn't over. It never was. In his years of leading some of the most ambitious companies in the world, he had become accustomed to the grind. The long hours, the relentless pressure to perform, the constant uncertainty of whether the next idea would be the one to change everything, Musk had weathered it all. But something had changed in him over the last few months. The trial had left its mark, not just on his reputation, but on how he saw the world, how he saw himself. It was as if the weight of all the years of unrelenting ambition and drive had finally caused him to stop and ask, "Why am I doing all of this?" He hadn't been able to answer that question at first. His mind was always moving ahead to the next milestone, the next challenge, the next frontier. But now, sitting quietly in the dim light of his office, Musk realized that the answer was staring him in the face. It wasn't just about the money. It wasn't just about the tech or the headlines. It was about something deeper, something that connected him to the people working with him, to the communities who relied on his innovations, to the future of the human race. He was building a legacy. The legacy was not just about the companies, the products, or even the technological breakthroughs. It was about how he led, how he inspired, how he got back up when everything seemed to fall apart. It was about the example he set. In a way, the trial had become a turning point. The public had seen him falter, and they had seen him fight back. They had seen the cracks, the vulnerabilities. And that had given them something they hadn't had before, a sense of connection to him. He wasn't just a tech mogul anymore. He was a man who had been through the fire and come out the other side. But now, as he looked toward the future, Musk understood that he couldn't do it all alone. Leadership wasn't just about being the smartest person in the room, the most visionary, or the most driven. It was about bringing people along for the journey, empowering them to do their best work, and creating a culture where failure was just another step toward success. And so, the next phase of Musk's leadership journey began. It wasn't just about pushing boundaries, it was about redefining what it meant to be a leader in the 21st century. He had learned the hard way that success didn't come without sacrifice. It came with grit, resilience, and the ability to adapt. But most importantly, it came with an understanding that leadership wasn't just about the destination, it was about the people you brought along with you on the journey. Later that week, Musk sat down for an interview with a prominent tech journalist, the first public appearance he had made since the trial. The buzz surrounding his upcoming comments had been building for days. Would he address the media's portrayal of him? Would he offer more insight into his legal battles? Or would he simply focus on the work ahead? As the cameras rolled, Musk felt the familiar tension of being under the microscope. But this time, he wasn't interested in playing the game. This time, he was going to speak from the heart. The journalist, Sarah Matthews, smiled as the interview began. "Elon, thank you for sitting down with me today. You've been in the spotlight for a long time now, but especially recently, with the trial and the media circus that followed. How has all of this affected you?" Musk took a deep breath, his hands resting on the table in front of him. "I won't lie, it's been tough. But it's also been a learning experience. The trial exposed things I hadn't really faced before, the consequences of my actions, my mistakes, and the public's perception of me. But I'm not afraid of that. I've always said that failure is part of the process. And if anything, this trial has reinforced my belief in the importance of pushing forward, no matter what." Sarah nodded, but the look in her eyes indicated that she wasn't done with the hard questions. You've been known as someone who isn't afraid to take risks. But some critics argue that you've taken those risks to the point of recklessness, especially with your approach to leadership. How do you respond to that? Musk's gaze sharpened. He had been expecting this question. He had expected all of it. I'm not afraid to take risks because, without them, there's no progress. We're in the business of changing the world. And if you're not willing to take risks, if you're not willing to challenge the status quo, then nothing ever changes. Do I make mistakes? Of course. But I don't believe in sitting on the sidelines just because I'm afraid of failure. He paused, letting the weight of his words hang in the air for a moment. But here's the thing, being a leader isn't just about making bold moves. It's about taking care of the people who are with you on that journey. I've learned that. It's not just about the vision. It's about how you bring people along with you. The interview aired the following week, and the response was overwhelming. This time, the public was torn, but in a different way. There was still the usual scrutiny from the critics, but Musk's words had struck a chord with many. They saw a different side of him, a side that was more introspective, more thoughtful. Some praised his honesty and vulnerability, while others saw it as a calculated PR move. The media was fickle, but Musk had long ago learned not to let it control him. He knew that the only way forward was to stay true to himself, no matter how much the world tried to tear him down. A few days later, Musk received a call from an old friend, David Archer, a renowned entrepreneur and venture capitalist. David had known Musk since the early days of PayPal, and they had always shared a mutual respect for each other's work. "Elon, how are you holding up?" David asked. "I saw the interview. You seemed different." Musk smiled, though the weight of everything still lingered in his voice. "I'm doing all right, David. Honestly, I'm just trying to find my footing again." The trial was a wake-up call. "I've spent so much time chasing the next big thing that I lost sight of the bigger picture. It's about more than just the tech. It's about the people, the impact." David was silent for a moment before responding. "You've always been the one to lead the charge, to blaze new trails. But maybe it's time to focus more on building something that lasts. The people who work with you, they look up to you more than you realize. They need to know you're in this for the long haul, not just for the next big idea." Musk nodded, the weight of David's words sinking in. This was exactly the kind of advice he needed, someone who understood the pressures, who had seen the toll leadership could take. "You're right," Musk said, his voice thoughtful. "It's time to build something that lasts." As Musk hung up the phone, he sat back in his chair, contemplating the conversation. The trial had opened his eyes to many things, but the most important lesson had been that true leadership wasn't just about vision or brilliance. It was about the people who helped make that vision a reality. It was about taking care of them, guiding them through the rough patches, and ensuring that the mission was bigger than any one person. And now, more than ever, he was ready to embrace that responsibility. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Elon Musk's life had always been a whirlwind of innovation and ambition. He had seen the highest highs and the lowest lows, yet there was always an underlying force that kept him moving forward, the relentless pursuit of a better future. But the events of the past few months had shaken him in ways he hadn't anticipated. The pressure was no longer just from the outside world, now it was internal, a growing conflict between who he had been and who he was becoming. As Musk walked through the SpaceX facility, the hum of activity around him seemed almost distant, as if muffled by the weight of his own thoughts. He had always been driven by a singular focus, achieving the seemingly impossible. Colonizing Mars, creating sustainable energy solutions, revolutionizing the automotive industry, these were the goals that had defined his life. But now, as he looked at the engineers hard at work, the scientists deep in conversation, and the technicians meticulously assembling the next generation of rockets, he couldn't help but feel a sense of doubt creeping in. Was he still the man he once was? The one who had taken risks without hesitation, who had pushed the boundaries of what was possible without looking back? Or had the burden of leadership, the weight of the world on his shoulders, finally started to change him? He had always prided himself on being a visionary, a man who saw beyond the horizon. But now, the horizon seemed so distant, and the road ahead felt unclear. The trial had cracked open a part of him that he hadn't known existed, a part of him that wondered whether all of his sacrifices had been worth it. Elon walked into his office, the door closing softly behind him. It was a familiar space, filled with the usual clutter of papers, models of spacecraft, and futuristic tech gadgets. But today, it felt empty in a way that made the room feel colder, less welcoming. He sat down at his desk, his hands resting on the surface as his mind wandered back to the moments of the trial. The mocking laughter, the biting words, the judgment that had been cast upon him, it had been more than just a professional battle. It had been deeply personal. And even though he had emerged with his reputation relatively intact, the experience had left a scar. His phone buzzed, pulling him from his thoughts. It was a message from Maria, his right-hand woman at SpaceX. "Elon, we need to talk. There's an urgent matter concerning the next Mars launch. I'll meet you in 15 minutes. Musk sighed, running a hand through his hair. It seemed like there was always something urgent. But he knew he couldn't afford to ignore this. The Mars program was his life's work, and every detail mattered. 15 minutes later, Maria entered the room, her expression serious. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. "We've encountered a serious setback," she said, her voice low. "There's a flaw in the propulsion system for the next launch. If we don't address it immediately, we risk a catastrophic failure. We need to pull the plug or fix the issue in the next 72 hours. The pressure is mounting." Musk's mind went into overdrive. This was it, another test of his leadership. A test he couldn't afford to fail. But there was something more unsettling about this than just the technical problem. The weight of his previous decisions, the mistakes he had made, the ever-watchful eye of the public, it all seemed to converge on this moment. "Do we have a solution?" Musk asked, his voice sharper than usual. Maria nodded. "We're working on it. But the clock is ticking. We might have to recalibrate the entire system, which means delaying the launch. It's a huge risk for both SpaceX and Tesla. The investors will never go for it." Musk leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. This was the moment. The decision that could either push SpaceX to new heights or cause everything to unravel. "Pull the plug," Musk said, his voice unwavering. "We fix it now, no shortcuts. If we launch without solving this problem, it's not just our company that's at risk, it's the entire mission to Mars." Maria looked surprised, but quickly nodded. "I'll inform the team. I'll also let the investors know. But we need to be ready for the fallout." "Let me handle the investors," Musk replied, standing up. "We've faced worse before. We can handle this." Hours later, Musk sat in yet another meeting, this time with a group of top investors. He could feel their eyes on him, the weight of their skepticism hanging in the air. They were a critical audience, and their patience was running thin. One of the investors, a graying man named Henry Lawson, spoke up. "Elon, we trusted you to lead SpaceX to the next phase of space exploration. But this delay, it's not just a technical issue. It's a breach of trust. You're playing with billions of dollars, and we need assurances that this isn't going to keep happening." Musk felt the familiar rush of frustration, but he kept his composure. He had dealt with far worse in the past, and he wasn't about to let this derail his vision. "I understand your concerns, Henry," Musk said, his voice calm but firm. "But this isn't about money, it's about the future. If we don't take the time to fix this, we're risking everything. We have one shot at getting this right, and I'm not going to take shortcuts. The future of humanity is on the line here, not just a profit margin. Another investor, Karen Simmons, leaned forward. You're asking us to take on more risk. We've seen this kind of approach before, and it's cost us. You're running out of time to prove that you can still lead SpaceX and make it a success. Musk's jaw tightened, but he didn't flinch. He had heard this before. The pressure, the criticism, it came with the territory. But it didn't change the facts. He knew what had to be done, and he wouldn't compromise on that. I've always taken risks, Musk said, his voice steady. That's what we do here. We aim for the impossible, and sometimes that means stepping into the unknown. But I've always believed that the only way to move forward is by pushing boundaries. We're not backing down. We're moving forward, together. There was a tense silence in the room, but finally, Henry Lawson spoke again. We'll give you the time you need, Elon. But we expect results. And we expect them soon. Musk nodded, feeling a small measure of victory. The road ahead would be tough, but this was what leadership required, staying true to his vision, no matter the cost. As he left the meeting, Musk felt a weight lift from his shoulders, but he also felt the familiar exhaustion creeping in. The battle was far from over. The world was watching, waiting for him to slip. And while he had managed to hold his ground today, he knew that he couldn't keep up this pace forever. But one thing was certain, he wasn't going to stop. The mission, the dream of Mars, the dream of a sustainable future, was bigger than any trial, any setback, or any obstacle. And as long as there was breath in his lungs, he would keep fighting. The journey was far from over. But Musk was no longer just fighting for the future of his companies or his reputation. He was fighting for something greater, something that would outlive him. The night was quiet, an eerie calm that settled over Tesla's headquarters. It was the kind of silence that comes just before a storm, the kind that had become all too familiar to Elon Musk over the years. He had always been one to thrive in the chaos of constant movement, whether it was the feverish pace of SpaceX, the cutthroat world of Tesla, or the relentless demands of his ever-growing empire, but tonight, he felt something different. A heaviness he couldn't quite shake. It had been weeks since the investor meeting and the Mars propulsion system issue. Things were moving forward again at SpaceX, but the pressure of that decision still lingered in the back of Musk's mind. As much as he had pushed forward, the trail of doubt seemed to follow. He couldn't escape the feeling that something was coming, something bigger than he could prepare for. Sitting in his office at Tesla, Elon stared at his phone, a list of emails and messages stacked up. He had a meeting scheduled with his senior team in just a few hours. The room was filled with reports, charts, and projections, but his thoughts were scattered. The road ahead didn't feel like a clear path to Mars anymore, it felt more like a tangled web of challenges, each thread leading to another obstacle. He picked up his phone and scrolled through the messages. There were the usual updates on Tesla's production lines, developments in autonomous driving technology, and new inquiries from investors. But amidst the noise, one particular message stood out. It was from Gwen, one of his trusted engineers at SpaceX. Elon, I need to talk. There's something important about the latest design. Can you meet me tomorrow? I think we need to address a few concerns before moving forward. Musk felt a slight knot form in his stomach. The last thing he wanted was another technical issue that could set them back, but he couldn't afford to ignore it. The uncertainty was eating at him, gnawing away at his resolve. The next morning, Elon made his way to SpaceX, the drive giving him some time to clear his mind. The world outside seemed to be in its usual frenzy, cars rushing by, people moving quickly in every direction. But for Musk, everything seemed to slow down. His thoughts swirled, as they often did, around his family, his companies, his legacy, and whether it was all really worth it. Once he arrived at SpaceX, Gwen was waiting for him in a small conference room, a holographic display already projecting the latest design for their Mars-bound spacecraft. Gwen, Musk greeted her, sitting down across from her at the table. What's going on? Gwen looked uneasy. Elon, I've been running some simulations on the updated design, and I'm concerned. There's a major flaw in the heat shield configuration. We've got the material right, but the way it's integrated with the propulsion system, it could cause a catastrophic failure under extreme re-entry conditions. If we don't fix it now, we're risking not just the mission but the credibility of everything we've worked for. Musk's heart skipped a beat. He had known that something might go wrong, he'd been bracing for it, but the gravity of the situation hit him in that moment. This wasn't just another setback. This was bigger than the propulsion system issue. This was a potential showstopper. So what do we do? Musk asked, keeping his voice steady even though the weight of the news was settling deep within him. We need to redesign the entire heat shield integration. It'll delay the launch by at least 6 months, maybe longer, depending on how quickly we can get the new tests done. But if we don't act now, it could be disastrous, Gwen explained, her tone calm but urgent. Musk closed his eyes for a moment, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. He'd always known that the path to Mars wouldn't be easy, but this felt different. This wasn't just another obstacle. It was a real danger that could threaten the entire vision he had worked so hard to build. But as he sat there, staring at the blueprints in front of him, something inside him stirred. This was what he had been preparing for all along, moments like this. The road to success wasn't linear. It was filled with bumps, detours, and even cliffs. But Musk had never been one to back down from a challenge, no matter how difficult it seemed. "We fix it," Musk said, his voice firm. "I don't care how long it takes. We're not launching until it's perfect. I won't put people's lives at risk for the sake of a timeline. We'll make it work." Gwen gave him a nod of respect. "Understood. I'll start working on the new design immediately." As the day wore on, Musk couldn't shake the feeling of doubt that continued to gnaw at him. The reality of what he had just committed to set in. The delay in the Mars mission would cost them millions, if not billions, of dollars. And more importantly, it could delay the future he had promised to the world. It wasn't just a technical setback, it was a PR nightmare waiting to happen. He sat in a meeting with his Tesla leadership team later that afternoon, but his mind wasn't fully in the room. The discussions about production timelines, battery tech, and autonomous vehicle systems felt distant, as if he were listening to someone else's problems. His thoughts kept drifting back to the Mars mission and the pressure mounting on his shoulders. One of the senior executives, Richard, spoke up. "Elon, we need to talk about the market conditions. The competition is getting stronger, and if we don't hit our production targets for the next quarter, we risk losing market share. Investors are starting to get nervous about our growth rate." Musk blinked, momentarily coming back to the present. "I know," he said, rubbing his eyes. "But I need everyone to focus on what's important right now. We can't afford to let the pressure get to us. We've been here before. The work we're doing with Tesla is crucial, but Mars is bigger than all of us. It's the future of humanity." Richard nodded, but there was a trace of skepticism in his voice. "That's all well and good, Elon. But we need results now. The investors are looking for concrete numbers, not just visionary speeches. If we can't deliver in the short term, the long term may never come." Musk leaned back in his chair, looking out the window at the sun setting over the horizon. For a moment, he just listened to the hum of the room, the murmurs of his team discussing financials, logistics, and production. But in his mind, he was back at SpaceX, standing next to the Mars spacecraft, feeling the weight of the world on his shoulders. What had he gotten himself into? The internal conflict was growing. He knew that the journey to Mars was bigger than anything else, but the constant pressure of balancing his multiple companies, pleasing investors, and meeting expectations, his own and others, was wearing him down. For the first time in a long while, Musk felt like he was standing on the edge of something much more profound, the future of humanity, yes, but also his own personal legacy. He had always believed that the journey was about pushing the limits of what was possible. But now, as the weight of it all seemed to settle on his chest, he wasn't sure how much further he could push himself, or how much longer he could keep it all together. Later that night, Elon stood alone on the rooftop of Tesla's headquarters, the city lights twinkling below. He was far from the rocket ships, far from the missions to Mars, but it didn't matter. The journey was all-encompassing. It was a journey that had taken him to places he never thought possible. But as the wind swept through his hair, he asked himself, was it enough? For the first time, Elon Musk wasn't just worried about the future of the companies he had built. He was worried about his own future. It had been weeks since Elon Musk had made the difficult decision to delay the Mars mission. Despite the tension it had caused among his investors, his resolve had remained unshaken. SpaceX had rallied, and the redesign of the spacecraft's heat shield system was underway. Yet, the cracks that had formed in his confidence were still there, hidden beneath the surface of his determination. He knew that the next challenge wouldn't be just technical, it would be personal. The courtroom loomed before him, its towering walls casting a long shadow over his every step. It wasn't the kind of place he was used to, but here he was, once again facing the legal world, ready to fight for his reputation, for his companies, for everything he had worked for. The mockery of the judge during his previous trial still echoed in his mind, and now, as the day of the next legal battle arrived, Musk couldn't shake the feeling that history was about to repeat itself. But this time, he had a plan, a different strategy, one that would show his opponents that they had underestimated him. As Musk entered the courtroom, the eyes of the public seemed to follow him. His reputation as a genius inventor and entrepreneur was no secret, but the media had painted him as unpredictable, volatile, and at times, out of control. This trial wasn't about technology or space exploration, it was about defending his business practices, defending his image, and ultimately, proving that he wasn't just a visionary who dreamed big but a leader who could deliver. The judge, a stern and experienced figure named Judge William Harland, was already seated at the bench. His reputation preceded him, known for his no-nonsense approach and razor-sharp intellect. Harland was the kind of judge who demanded respect. He had mocked Musk during their previous encounter in a much-publicized case, and Musk knew that this trial was his chance to set the record straight. Musk took his seat at the defense table, flanked by his legal team. The opposition, a group of seasoned corporate lawyers, sat across from him, their eyes cold and calculating. They were ready to pounce on every misstep, every flaw in Musk's argument. But what they didn't realize was that he had learned from the past. He had prepared for this moment, and he was ready to fight back in a way that no one had seen before. Judge Harland banged his gavel, signaling the start of the proceedings. "This court will now hear the defense," he said, his voice echoing through the room. Musk stood, his posture straight, his mind focused. As he addressed the court, he could feel the weight of every eye in the room. "Your Honor, members of the court," he began, his voice calm but firm. "I stand here today not only to defend myself but to defend the principles that have guided me throughout my career, innovation, responsibility, and the unwavering belief that we can build a better future." His words were measured, but there was a power in them. For the first time in a long while, Musk felt a sense of control. This wasn't just a legal battle, it was a statement. The opposition wasted no time in launching their attack. They questioned Musk's business decisions, his leadership style, and his public statements. They portrayed him as reckless, a man who was more interested in self-promotion than the well-being of his companies. But Musk stood firm, answering each question with precision, revealing a depth of knowledge and insight that surprised even his critics. He wasn't the brash entrepreneur they had painted him to be, he was a strategist, a visionary who understood the complexities of his businesses far better than anyone realized. The courtroom was tense, but as the hours passed, it became clear that Musk was gaining the upper hand. His responses were not only legally sound but deeply philosophical. He spoke about the importance of risk, the necessity of thinking beyond the immediate horizon, and the responsibility he felt toward his employees, investors, and, ultimately, humanity. But the real turning point came when Judge Harland himself took the floor. "You claim to be a visionary, Mr. Musk," Harland said, his voice tinged with skepticism. "But how can we trust someone who plays fast and loose with the rules? How can we believe in your vision if your actions contradict your words?" Musk met the judge's gaze, unflinching. "Your Honor, I have never claimed to be perfect. I have made mistakes, as any entrepreneur or leader does. But I have always acted in good faith. I've never taken risks without considering the consequences. I've always believed that progress requires us to challenge the status quo, to push the boundaries of what is possible. If that makes me reckless, then perhaps I am guilty. But if it makes me a visionary, then I accept that label as well." The room fell silent. For a moment, even Judge Harland seemed taken aback by Musk's response. It was a rare sight. Musk had defied expectations. He hadn't just played the part of the accused, he had taken control of the narrative, turning the trial into a platform for his vision, not just his defense. The remainder of the trial unfolded in a similar fashion. Musk's legal team delivered compelling arguments, bolstered by Musk's unwavering presence and sharp legal acumen. He had done his homework, not just on the facts of the case but on the nuances of the law, the behavior of his accusers, and the psychology of the courtroom. He wasn't just defending himself, he was outsmarting them. When the trial finally concluded, there was a sense of uncertainty in the air. The judge and jury would deliberate, but it was clear that the case had taken a turn. Elon Musk had turned the tables on his detractors, proving that he was more than just a CEO of innovative companies, he was a force to be reckoned with. As he left the courtroom that day, Musk felt a sense of accomplishment, but also a deeper understanding of the cost of his journey. This was not just a legal victory, it was a moment of personal growth. For years, Musk had been defined by his companies, by the incredible feats he had achieved. But now, he was learning that the greatest battles were the ones within. The doubts, the fears, the insecurities, he had to confront them, or they would consume him. The world may have doubted him, but Musk had proven that his brilliance wasn't just in his ability to innovate. It was in his ability to adapt, to learn, and to overcome every obstacle in his path. The courtroom battle had ended, but the reverberations from the trial were far from over. As Elon Musk walked out of the courthouse, he felt a sense of both relief and apprehension. The media frenzy that had followed him throughout the trial was only intensifying, and the victory in court had done little to silence the whispers behind closed doors. While some hailed his brilliance in the courtroom, others were quick to criticize his unorthodox methods and brash demeanor. Musk wasn't one to shy away from controversy, but this felt different. This trial, though won on legal terms, had taken a toll on him in ways he wasn't prepared for. The long nights of preparation, the constant pressure to defend his every move, and the looming shadow of doubt, it had all piled up, and now, as the dust settled, it was clear, the fight wasn't over. Back at Tesla's headquarters, Musk sat in his office, staring at his desk. The room was unusually quiet. The usual hum of activity from his staff seemed distant, as if they were waiting for him to take the next step. The latest trial had only added another layer to the already complex web of challenges he faced. Tesla's production goals were slipping behind. SpaceX's Mars mission was in jeopardy due to the delay in the spacecraft's redesign. And investors were beginning to ask the tough questions, questions Musk didn't always have the answers to. In an attempt to regain control, Musk called an emergency meeting with his senior leadership team. As his colleagues filtered into the conference room, Musk could sense the tension. Everyone knew that the stakes were higher than ever. The company was at a critical juncture, and they needed a plan, one that could get them through the next few months and keep the momentum going. "Elon," said Richard, one of Tesla's senior executives, after the meeting started. "We need to talk about the production timeline. We're falling behind on the Cybertruck deliveries, and we can't afford any more delays. Our competitors are closing in on us." Musk nodded, his fingers tapping absent-mindedly on the table. He had been hearing this same message for weeks. "I know," he said, his voice steady but tired. But the Mars mission comes first. If SpaceX doesn't deliver on schedule, everything could fall apart. You all need to understand this. We're not just building electric cars, we're building the future. But I can't do it alone. We need to think long-term. Richard's face hardened. Long-term doesn't mean anything if we're out of business today, Elon. We have to focus on the short term, or we won't have a future to build. Musk felt the weight of those words. The clash between short-term results and long-term vision had always been a source of friction. He had always believed that the future was worth the sacrifice of today's comforts. But in that moment, he couldn't ignore the mounting pressure. The investors wanted to see numbers, they wanted results. And they weren't patient. The room fell silent. The tension was palpable. Musk leaned back in his chair, his mind racing through potential solutions. For a moment, he thought back to the trial, the way he had faced his accusers and turned the tables. He had been prepared for that moment. But this was different. This wasn't a courtroom battle. This was the battle for his companies, for his vision. It wasn't just about winning the legal fight, it was about winning the war. We'll do both, Musk finally said, his voice low but firm. We'll focus on the Cybertruck deliveries, but we won't abandon SpaceX. We're going to push through this, even if it means taking risks. He could see the skepticism in his team's eyes. They had heard this before. Musk was known for his bold ideas, but there was a fine line between genius and recklessness. The question was, had he crossed that line? The next few days were a blur of meetings, strategies, and decisions. Musk was moving faster than ever, trying to juggle the demands of both Tesla and SpaceX. The weight of his responsibilities felt heavier than it ever had before. But despite the exhaustion, there was a fire inside him that wouldn't go out. The road to Mars was still the goal, but he couldn't lose sight of Tesla's future. Without one, there could be no other. Meanwhile, the media continued to fuel the controversy. Headlines and stories about Musk's courtroom triumph were plastered across every news outlet, but it wasn't the victory that they focused on. Instead, they highlighted his erratic behavior, his eccentricities, and his complicated personality. Some called him a genius, others a madman. But the constant scrutiny was wearing on him, and it was starting to take a toll on his relationships. At home, the pressure was even more apparent. Grimes had been supportive throughout the trial, but the strain of balancing her own career with Elon's never-ending commitments was becoming too much. The time apart had only deepened the distance between them, and their once passionate relationship was beginning to feel strained. She had always known what she was getting into when she became involved with Musk, but even she couldn't deny the weight of it all. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of meetings and press conferences, Musk returned to the house to find Grimes sitting on the couch, a pensive look on her face. "Elon," she said quietly, not looking up from her phone. "We need to talk." Musk knew what was coming. They had been down this road before, but he wasn't sure if he was ready to have the conversation again. "Is this about the trial?" he asked, already sensing the tension in the air. "It's not just the trial," she replied, her voice strained. "It's everything. Your constant focus on the future, on your companies, it's like you've forgotten about us. You've forgotten about me." Musk sat down beside her, the weight of her words sinking in. He had been so consumed by the relentless drive to push forward, to conquer new frontiers, that he had neglected the things that truly mattered. The people closest to him. "I'm sorry," Musk said, his voice low. "I didn't mean for things to get like this. I'm trying to build something bigger than all of us. Something that matters." "I know you are," she replied, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and understanding. "But you can't do it alone. And you can't keep sacrificing everything for a dream that might never come true. You need to remember what you're fighting for." Musk stared at her, the silence hanging heavy between them. For a brief moment, the weight of the world seemed to lift. He realized that Grimes was right. He had become so focused on the grand vision that he had lost sight of the little things, the people who had been there with him from the start. "I won't give up on us," he said, his voice sincere. "I'll find a way to balance everything. I promise." As the conversation ended, Musk felt a sense of clarity. The road ahead was still fraught with challenges, but he knew that he couldn't keep fighting alone. He needed his team, he needed his family, and he needed to remember why he started this journey in the first place. Elon Musk was a man known for making headlines, whether it was launching rockets into space, introducing groundbreaking electric cars, or making bold promises that left the world questioning what was possible. But now, as he sat in his office late one evening, it was the silence that he found the most unsettling. The whirlwind of the trial was over, the immediate crisis seemed under control, and his companies were still running, though with new hurdles around every corner. Despite the successes, something was missing, a sense of balance. For the first time in a long while, he found himself questioning if all the sacrifices were worth it. The quest to revolutionize space travel and electric vehicles had consumed him, and now, after the dust of the courtroom settled, he had time to reflect on the cost. There were no easy answers. Musk's phone buzzed on the desk, breaking his chain of thought. He picked it up to see a text from his lead engineer at SpaceX. "Mark, we're behind schedule on the heat shield redesign. Do we need to delay the test flight again?" Musk stared at the message, running his fingers through his hair. He'd been in this position before, pressured to make decisions that could push his companies forward or set them back. The problem was, every delay felt like a setback for humanity's journey into space. He was obsessed with the idea of getting to Mars, of proving that humanity could survive and thrive beyond Earth. But every delay added weight to his already burdened shoulders. He responded with a simple but firm message: push forward. "We're not delaying again." As soon as he sent the text, Musk realized that his own stubbornness, his refusal to accept anything less than perfection, was a double-edged sword. It had brought him success, but it had also alienated people along the way. His team at SpaceX, his employees at Tesla, and even his family, they all paid a price for his relentless pursuit of the future. The challenge now was balancing the drive with the need for personal connection. After the conversation with Grimes, he had made an unspoken promise to himself. It wasn't just about building the future anymore, it was about being present in the present. The next day, Musk made an unexpected decision. Rather than heading straight to the SpaceX headquarters, he decided to take a detour. He needed to clear his mind, and he knew exactly where to go. He drove to the Tesla factory. As he stepped out of the car and looked at the sprawling complex, he was reminded of why he had started this journey in the first place. It wasn't just about cars, rockets, or electric power. Tesla was about making a tangible difference in the world. The factory had been the birthplace of so many innovations, and it was still the heart of Tesla's mission to change the world. The factory floor was humming with activity as he walked through it, observing engineers and assembly line workers who, despite their own challenges, continued to push forward. Elon felt a sense of pride wash over him. These people were just as driven as he was, yet they had a way of finding joy in the work itself, not just the end result. "Hey, Elon," came a voice from behind him. He turned to see his longtime friend and Tesla CTO, J.B. Straubel, walking toward him with a smile. "J.B.," Musk greeted, shaking his friend's hand. "How's everything going here?" "Good, good," J.B. replied, "but we've hit a bit of a wall with the battery efficiency testing. It's not a major problem, but it's slowing us down." Musk nodded, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. "What can we do to fix it?" J.B. paused, looking around. "Honestly, we need to shift some of the resources from the Cybertruck project over to this, at least for a while. We're not going to meet the targets otherwise." Musk considered the request. It was another balancing act, his drive for perfection versus the harsh realities of running a company. The Cybertruck had been a major part of Tesla's strategy, but if the battery efficiency issues weren't resolved, the entire company's future could be at risk. "We'll adjust," Musk said decisively. "We'll find a way to make it work." As JB left to implement the changes, Musk felt the weight of responsibility settling back into his chest. But there was something different about this moment. The factory floor, buzzing with energy and innovation, reminded him of the core values that had first driven him, values that were not just about changing the world but about changing how people viewed their roles in it. He could see the same fire in the eyes of the people working here that he saw in himself. They were willing to sacrifice for something bigger, not for fame or glory, but for the belief that they were part of something important. And for the first time in a long while, Elon Musk realized that maybe he needed to reconnect with that fire. He couldn't do it alone. He never had. Later that afternoon, Elon sat down with his leadership team at Tesla. They had to make critical decisions about the upcoming quarter. As he looked around the table, he realized that this was the group he had trusted all along. They were his core, and he owed it to them to share not just the vision for the future but also the challenges he had been facing, both personal and professional. "I know the pressure is high," Musk started, his voice more vulnerable than usual. "We're all in this together. But I've been thinking about how to push us through the next phase of growth." The room fell silent, and Musk could feel the weight of their attention. It wasn't just about numbers and deadlines anymore, it was about leadership and trust. "We're not just working for numbers or for our investors," he continued. "We're working to change the world. But we can't do it without each other. The way I've been operating lately, focused solely on the end goal, hasn't been fair to any of you. I promise to work on finding more balance. And I want to make sure we're all in it together." The sincerity in Musk's words caught everyone by surprise. There was a palpable shift in the room, a sense of renewed camaraderie. He wasn't just the boss anymore, he was one of them. And they were in this fight for the same reasons. As the meeting concluded, Musk walked out of the conference room feeling lighter. He had made a decision to change the way he approached his companies, not just as a visionary, but as a leader who understood the value of those who followed him. The next few months would be filled with challenges: Tesla's battery efficiency, SpaceX's Mars mission, and his personal life, but for the first time in a long while, he felt like he wasn't walking this path alone. As he headed to the parking lot, Musk paused to look at the horizon. The future was still waiting for him, but now, more than ever, he knew that the journey was just as important as the destination. Elon Musk had always been a man who thrived on challenges. For him, the greatest achievements often came from the most daunting tasks, the ones others would deem impossible. But with the recent string of setbacks, delays at Tesla, mounting pressure at SpaceX, and his growing personal life challenges, Musk could no longer ignore the elephant in the room. He had reached a crossroads where his next decision could either propel his companies toward new heights or bring everything crashing down. For months, SpaceX's Mars mission had been moving forward with aggressive goals. The company was building the Starship, a spacecraft that Musk envisioned as humanity's vessel to the Red Planet. But the road to Mars was full of obstacles. The recent setback with the heat shield was just one of many, and Musk could feel the weight of every delay on his shoulders. The media was starting to turn on him again, questioning whether SpaceX would ever reach Mars or if it was all just a pipe dream. The pressure was immense, but Musk had never been one to back down from a challenge. If anything, the stakes were higher than ever before. And that's when it hit him: perhaps the best way to move forward wasn't to continue the current path, but to take an even bigger risk. If he could launch a successful mission to Mars, one that garnered worldwide attention, it could catapult SpaceX, and even Tesla, into the next phase of their futures. But this decision was a gamble. It was the kind of gamble that could backfire in spectacular fashion. The next day, Elon called a meeting at SpaceX's headquarters in Hawthorne, California. As he walked into the sleek, modern conference room, his team already gathered around the table, he could see the familiar faces of engineers and technicians, people who had stood by him through the toughest moments. But today, the air was different. There was a quiet anticipation in the room, a sense that something was about to change. "Elon," said Gwynne Shotwell, the president and COO of SpaceX, breaking the silence. "We've been discussing the potential launch schedules, and we're running out of time to hit the window for Mars. If we miss this opportunity, we'll have to wait another 2 years for the next launch window." Musk nodded, his mind already racing. "That's not an option," he replied, his voice steady. "We're going to launch this year." The room fell silent. Everyone knew what that meant. To launch this year, they would have to push everything to the limit. The spacecraft wasn't ready for flight, the fuel systems needed recalibration, and the support systems weren't fully operational. "We'll have to cut corners," one of the engineers, Raj, said cautiously. "If we push this through with current specs, there's a risk of failure. A major failure." Musk's gaze hardened. He knew the risks, but there was no turning back. "I'm aware of the risks," he said. "But we're going for it. I'm putting everything on the line. SpaceX, Tesla, everything. If we don't take this chance now, we may never get another one." Gwynne exchanged a look with Raj, and then, after a long pause, she nodded. "Okay. We're with you, Elon. We'll make it happen." Musk's heart raced. He knew this decision could define his legacy, or end it. Over the next few weeks, SpaceX worked at a feverish pace. Engineers and technicians slept in shifts at the headquarters, working around the clock to prepare Starship for the mission. Every detail mattered, every failure could set them back months, or even years. But Musk didn't waver. He threw himself into the work, meticulously going over every aspect of the mission, from the spacecraft's propulsion systems to the trajectory calculations. Meanwhile, at Tesla, the pressure was equally intense. The factory was buzzing with activity as the production team worked overtime to meet their targets for the Cybertruck. Musk's earlier decision to shift resources to SpaceX's needs had caused a minor delay in the truck's production timeline, but it was still manageable. Tesla had weathered storms before, and Musk wasn't about to let one more challenge knock him off course. However, the strain was starting to show. Employees at both companies were feeling the fatigue. The relentless pace was taking its toll on the morale of the teams. Some had begun to question whether Musk's singular focus on space exploration was leaving Tesla in the dust. While the world admired his vision, his unyielding determination often left little room for the day-to-day challenges that kept Tesla running. As the launch date drew closer, the weight of the decision began to settle heavily on Musk's shoulders. The media, sensing the tension, began to churn out more stories, some focused on the audacity of Musk's Mars mission, others on the potential for failure. It was as if the world was waiting for him to slip up, to show that even the great Elon Musk wasn't immune to failure. Musk tried to block out the noise, but it was harder than ever before. The pressure to succeed felt like a constant weight. If this mission failed, it could destroy not only SpaceX but also Tesla. Investors were already getting nervous, and many were starting to question whether Musk's ambition was clouding his judgment. And then, one evening, as Musk sat in his office, he received an unexpected call. It was from a private investor who had supported both SpaceX and Tesla from the beginning. "Elon, we've been following the developments closely," the voice on the other end said. "And I need to be honest with you. We're concerned. You're spreading yourself too thin. If this Mars mission doesn't succeed, we won't be able to keep supporting you. Not with Tesla's stock dropping, not with the constant delays." Musk's fingers tightened around the phone. He had known this conversation was coming, but hearing it out loud hit him like a punch to the gut. The stakes had never been higher, and now, everything was on the line. "I know the stakes," Musk replied, his voice cold but resolute. "But I'm doing this. I'm putting everything I've got into this mission. We're not turning back." The line went quiet for a moment. The investor on the other end hesitated before speaking again. "You're a visionary, Elon. You've proven that. But sometimes even visionaries can lose their way. I haven't lost my way, Musk said firmly, and I'm not giving up. The conversation ended, but the words echoed in Musk's mind. Was he risking too much? Was his obsession with Mars blinding him to the present? As the days ticked by, Musk knew there was no going back. He had made his choice. Now he had to live with it. The days leading up to the launch were a blur. Elon Musk had thrown everything into the Mars mission. SpaceX was working at full capacity, pushing all systems to their limits, trying to make every piece of the mission fall into place. The clock was ticking, and the pressure was mounting, both from within his companies and from the media. Elon barely slept anymore. He was constantly reviewing data, checking launch schedules, and meeting with engineers. Every moment counted. With each passing day, the stakes got higher. If this mission succeeded, it would secure his legacy as the man who brought humanity to Mars. But if it failed, it would likely bring everything crashing down, not just SpaceX and Tesla, but his entire reputation. Musk's mind wasn't just on the mission, though. He couldn't ignore the looming tension at Tesla. While the focus was on the Mars mission, production at the Tesla factories had slowed due to the shift in resources. The Cybertruck was behind schedule, and rumors were circulating about the company's financial health. In his quiet moments, Elon couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. Was he too obsessed with space? Had he neglected his other responsibilities? Tesla was his first major success, the company that had changed the way the world thought about electric cars. He didn't want to see it falter because of his fixation on the stars. But there was no turning back now. On the morning of the launch, the atmosphere at SpaceX headquarters was electric. The countdown clock was ticking down to the final moments, and teams were on high alert. Engineers were double-checking systems, technicians were running diagnostics, and the media had gathered from all over the world to witness what could be one of the most historic events of the century. Elon walked into the control room, his heart pounding in his chest. The room was filled with quiet chatter, the hum of monitors, and the sounds of people hard at work. He could feel the tension in the air, the weight of the world on his shoulders. But he pushed the nerves aside. He couldn't afford to show weakness, not today. "Everything's looking good," Gwynne Shotwell said as she approached him. Her face was calm, but Elon could see the edge of stress in her eyes. She had been working tirelessly on this mission, just as he had, and now they were finally at the point of no return. Musk nodded. "Let's do this." As the countdown began, the entire room held its breath. For a moment, Elon allowed himself to look out the window at the rocket sitting on the launch pad. The Starship stood tall against the blue sky, ready to carry humanity's dreams beyond Earth. He thought back to the early days of SpaceX when the company had barely been able to afford a single test launch. Now, they were on the brink of something much greater. The countdown reached its final 10 seconds, and the room went silent. Musk's hand hovered over the button, his mind racing. It was the moment of truth. Everything, his career, his companies, the future of humanity's exploration of space, depended on this. 10, 9, 8. Musk's fingers trembled slightly, but he stayed focused. 7, 6. He had done everything he could. He had made every possible adjustment, pushed his teams to the limit, and sacrificed more than anyone could ever understand. He could feel the weight of every decision that had brought him to this point. 5, 4, 3. His pulse quickened, but he kept his eyes locked on the rocket. He couldn't afford to falter now. Not when the world was watching. 2, 1. Lift off. The room erupted in applause as the Starship blasted off the launch pad, soaring into the sky. The rocket's engines roared as it broke through the atmosphere, and for a brief moment, everything seemed perfect. Musk stood there, his hands clenched at his sides, watching the rocket disappear into the sky. The weight of the moment was indescribable. It wasn't just about the rocket or the technology, it was about proving something. proving that humanity could reach for the stars, that SpaceX could take on the impossible and succeed. But as the hours passed, the excitement in the control room began to shift into nervous anticipation. The mission was far from over. The starship still had to complete the most critical phase of its journey, the landing. Elon knew that failure in the final stages of the mission would be catastrophic. The world would be watching. SpaceX's reputation, and his own, would be on the line. The pressure was unbearable, but he kept his cool. He couldn't let anyone see how much he was truly feeling. Hours later, the first signs of trouble began to appear. "We're getting some unusual data from the landing system," said Raj, one of SpaceX's top engineers. His voice was calm but edged with concern. "The thrusters aren't responding as expected." Musk's stomach tightened. He had been through countless failures in the past, but this felt different. The world was watching, and failure was not an option. Not today. As the starship neared its landing zone, the data continued to get worse. The thrusters were failing to correct the descent trajectory, and the rocket was coming in too fast. SpaceX engineers were frantically trying to reroute the system, but Musk knew that time was running out. "Cut the feed," he said suddenly, his voice cold. "I don't want the world to see this if it goes wrong." The room fell silent. It was a tough decision, but Musk had always been a pragmatist. He would protect his company, his teams, and his vision at all costs. If this mission failed, he wasn't going to let it destroy everything they had worked for. The next few minutes felt like an eternity. The entire control room was on edge, staring at the data screens, waiting for the outcome. And then, just as Musk was about to make the hardest decision of his life, the screen suddenly flashed green. The thrusters kicked in. The starship corrected its descent and touched down softly, the landing successful. The room erupted in a mix of relief and joy. Musk stood there for a moment, frozen, as the reality of the success began to sink in. He had done it. The first ever successful landing of a Mars-bound spacecraft was a historic moment, one that would be remembered forever. "Elon, you did it," Gwynne Shotwell said, her voice a mixture of awe and admiration. "We did it." The thrill of the successful landing was still fresh in Elon Musk's mind, but there was no time for celebration. The world had witnessed the impossible, and with that success came a new wave of expectations. Media outlets were already hailing the achievement, calling it the next step in human history, while investors began lining up to pour more money into both SpaceX and Tesla. But Musk knew that the real work had only just begun. As the news of the successful landing reverberated around the globe, the pressure intensified. Musk's phone rang incessantly, as calls from business partners, journalists, and government officials flooded in. Everyone wanted to know the next steps. How soon would the next mission take place? How could they follow up on this groundbreaking success? Musk sat at his desk, his hands resting on the sides of his chair. Despite the chaos swirling around him, his mind was clear. He wasn't thinking about the money or the accolades. He was thinking about the future. Back at SpaceX's headquarters, the engineers and technicians were hard at work, poring over data from the landing. The mission had succeeded, but the journey wasn't over. The next step, sending humans to Mars, was far more complex and dangerous. "Everything looks good on our end," Raj said, approaching Musk with a tablet in hand. "The landing was a success, but there are still a few issues with the life support systems we need to address." Musk took the tablet and skimmed through the data. His eyes were sharp, focused. "Get on it. We don't have time to waste." Raj nodded and turned to leave, but Musk called after him. "Make sure the team knows this mission wasn't just about proving we could land. It's about making the next step possible. This is the real challenge." Meanwhile, the media frenzy continued. Reporters were scrambling to interview Musk, to get a glimpse into his next big idea. But Elon was tired. He had just pulled off one of the biggest accomplishments in modern history, but the constant attention was exhausting. The long hours, the pressure, the endless decisions, it was all starting to wear him down. He stood outside in the courtyard, looking out at the SpaceX complex. The sun was setting, casting a golden light over the buildings. It was beautiful, but it also felt distant. Musk had been so focused on the mission that he hadn't taken a moment to appreciate the world around him. Elon's mind began to wander to a place he rarely visited, his personal life. He hadn't spoken to his family in days, and his relationships with his friends had grown distant. He had sacrificed everything for this moment, but at what cost? Would he ever be able to reconcile the man he had become with the one he once was? Just as he was lost in thought, his phone rang again. This time, it was from the office of the Tesla board of directors. "Mr. Musk, we need to discuss the future of Tesla," the voice on the other end said. "There are concerns about the Cybertruck's production delays, and we want to make sure the company is moving in the right direction. Some board members are beginning to question whether SpaceX's demands are distracting you from Tesla's long-term goals." Musk's stomach tightened. He had been waiting for this call. There had been murmurs within Tesla's board for weeks, ever since he had started to pour more of his focus into the Mars mission. "I'm fully committed to Tesla's success," Musk said, his voice steady but with an edge of frustration. "I haven't forgotten about Tesla, and I'm not going to let anything derail its future. But I won't apologize for focusing on SpaceX. We're on the verge of something huge. And that could change everything for Tesla as well." The voice on the other end didn't respond immediately. After a beat, the person spoke again, this time more cautiously. "We understand, Elon. But you need to be careful. If we lose sight of Tesla's goals, we risk losing the momentum we've built. SpaceX is important, but so is Tesla. We don't want to see the company lose its edge." Musk took a deep breath. This was a battle he had been dreading. Tesla had been his first love, his first true success, but he couldn't afford to take his foot off the gas now. Not with the world watching. "I'll make sure we're on track," he said, his voice firm. "But SpaceX isn't just a side project. It's the future. And Tesla's future is tied to it. Remember that." As the conversation ended, Musk sat back in his chair, his mind racing. Tesla and SpaceX had become intertwined in ways he hadn't fully realized. His work on one had the potential to shape the future of the other. But balancing both would be a challenge like no other. How could he keep both companies at the top of their game while also pushing forward into the unknown of space exploration? He knew he couldn't do it alone. Later that evening, Musk made a rare decision. He invited Gwynne Shotwell and a few key members of the SpaceX team to dinner. It was a time for reflection and strategy, but also a chance to talk about the road ahead. They met at a quiet restaurant not far from SpaceX's headquarters, one of those places where Elon could escape the usual media frenzy. They sat down at a private table, away from the crowds, and ordered dinner. "Elon," Gwynne said, breaking the silence. "You've done something incredible. You've proven that we can get to Mars. But we both know the real work starts now. You have to find a way to balance everything. SpaceX, Tesla, the future of humanity, it's all on your shoulders." Musk nodded, staring into his glass of water. The weight of her words hit him harder than he expected. "I've been so focused on Mars that I haven't given enough attention to the things that matter most. I've pushed too hard, too fast. I need to refocus. But I can't do it alone." Gwynne met his gaze. "You don't have to. You've got us. We're with you." As the evening drew to a close, Elon realized something important. He couldn't continue on this path alone, constantly pushing the limits without regard for the people who helped him get there. He needed to lean on his team more, share the load, and trust that others would pick up the slack when needed. But there was still one question that gnawed at him: what comes next? He had taken humanity's first step toward Mars, but the journey had only just begun. The challenges ahead were unlike anything he had ever faced, and no amount of success could erase the enormity of the task still in front of him. And as he left the restaurant that night, he knew one thing for sure: the road to Mars would be just as much about his own evolution as it was about reaching the stars. The days following the successful Mars landing were a whirlwind. The press, as expected, didn't let up. The media was now obsessed with Elon Musk and his vision for humanity's future in space. Headlines screamed that Musk had done what no one thought was possible. But even amidst the accolades and celebrations, the pressure weighed heavily on him. The world's eyes were on him, watching, waiting, hoping for the next breakthrough. While SpaceX pushed forward with its mission to Mars, Musk's focus began to shift toward a new, unanticipated challenge: Tesla. Tesla's stock had taken a hit after the board meeting, and the company's production delays were being discussed more in the media. Musk had always prided himself on defying expectations, but now the pressure from within his own company was growing. The balance between his companies was tipping, and it was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain his commitment to both. Musk sat in his office late at night, staring out the window. The office was quiet, with only the soft hum of the city below him. His phone buzzed on the desk, another text from the Tesla board. "We need more answers on the Cybertruck's production timeline." The board is growing increasingly concerned. He ran a hand over his face. The same concerns had been raised in the past weeks. The Cybertruck was delayed, production was slower than expected, and the pressure to meet deadlines was building. He couldn't afford to let Tesla slip. After all, Tesla was his legacy, the company that had revolutionized the auto industry. Yet, the larger vision of SpaceX constantly pulled his attention. He knew he couldn't keep up this pace forever. The next morning, as Musk arrived at SpaceX, Gwynne Shotwell found him in the hall, her expression serious. She had a look on her face that told him something wasn't quite right. "Morning, Elon," she greeted him, her voice laced with concern. "We've got a problem." Elon furrowed his brow, instinctively bracing himself. "What now?" "There's been a breach in one of our satellite communications. We've lost contact with the Starship in orbit." Musk's heart skipped a beat. The Starship had been in orbit for hours, and they were due to begin the next phase of the mission. Losing contact at this stage would not only set them back, but it could also jeopardize the mission entirely. "How bad?" he asked, his voice low, as he followed Gwynne into the control room. "The communication link is down, and we don't know why," she said. "It could be a technical glitch, or it could be something more serious. But we won't know until we establish contact again." Elon's mind raced. A problem like this could take hours, maybe even days, to resolve. Time was not something he had. With the media hounding him for progress reports, the pressure only mounted. "We need to fix this, now," he ordered. "No delays." Back in the control room, Musk stood before the massive screens displaying satellite data. The technicians were typing frantically, rerouting systems, trying everything to restore the connection. Hours passed with no progress. Musk's frustration was palpable as he paced around the room. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, one of the engineers called out. "We've got a signal." Musk rushed to the screen, his heart pounding in his chest. The Starship signal finally came through, but the news was not as good as he had hoped. "Damage," the technician said. "The satellite antenna is completely fried. It's going to take days to get a replacement up here, and we'll have to rely on backup systems for the rest of the mission." Musk's mind swirled. He had faced setbacks before, but this was different. The whole mission was at risk. The world would be watching every moment, waiting for him to fail. If the backup systems failed, they'd be forced to abort the mission. As the hours passed, the Starship systems slowly began to stabilize. Musk remained glued to the data screens, watching the updates come in. The tension in the room was palpable. For a few moments, it seemed like they might actually pull through. But then came the final blow. A warning light blinked on the control panel. The fuel reserves in the Starship were dangerously low. Musk had never expected this. The engineers had calculated everything down to the smallest detail, but there was always room for error in space exploration. And now, a mission to Mars was hanging by a thread. Back in his office, Musk sat alone, his head in his hands. Everything was falling apart. The communication failure, the fuel issue, it all seemed to be going wrong. The world would never forget this moment, but not for the reasons he had hoped. His phone buzzed again. Another message from the Tesla board. The email was short, direct, and damning. "We are beginning to lose confidence in your leadership. Tesla needs your undivided attention now. If you're not able to lead both companies, we may have to make some tough decisions." Musk's heart sank. The one thing he had been avoiding had come to a head. He couldn't keep up with both SpaceX and Tesla anymore. His leadership was being questioned, and the weight of it all was suffocating. He picked up the phone and dialed Gwyn's number. "Elon," her voice answered quickly. "What's going on?" "We're in trouble," he said simply. "The mission's in jeopardy, and Tesla's board is losing faith in me. I don't know how to balance this anymore. I've given everything, but it feels like I'm losing both." Gwyn was quiet for a moment. "You've always known this wouldn't be easy. But you can't do it alone. You have to trust the team. You have to trust yourself." Musk leaned back in his chair, staring out the window. SpaceX had become his passion, his obsession. But Tesla, the electric car company that had launched his career, was falling into the background. The constant struggle between the two companies was taking its toll. "What if I can't fix it?" he asked quietly, the uncertainty creeping into his voice for the first time. "Then you get back up and try again," Gwyn replied, her voice resolute. "That's who you are, Elon. You never give up." Musk sighed deeply. She was right. This was just another challenge, another setback to overcome. But this time, the stakes were higher. The future of SpaceX, Tesla, and his entire vision for the future of humanity hung in the balance. As the day ended and Musk stood on the balcony overlooking the SpaceX complex, a thought lingered in his mind. The journey to Mars was still the goal. But the road to getting there was never going to be easy. He would have to face the consequences of his decisions, deal with the doubters, and rebuild trust, both in his companies and in himself. It wouldn't be easy. But Elon Musk had never taken the easy route. And he wasn't about to start now. Elon Musk had always known that the road to success was filled with challenges, but the events of the past few days had tested him in ways he had never anticipated. It was as if the universe itself had thrown every obstacle in his path, yet there was a part of him that couldn't help but feel a strange sense of resolve. It wasn't over. It couldn't be. Not now. The next morning, Musk made a decision. He called an emergency meeting with the leadership teams of both SpaceX and Tesla. It was time to face the music. It was time to take control. When he walked into the room, the air was thick with tension. Everyone was on edge, unsure of what he was going to say. There were no pleasantries, no introductions. Elon didn't waste any time. "We're facing an uphill battle," he began, his voice steady but carrying the weight of his experiences. "We've hit a rough patch, both with SpaceX and Tesla. But we've been here before. We've faced setbacks that seemed insurmountable. And we've always come out on top. This is no different." He paused, letting his words sink in. His team had seen the lowest lows and the highest highs, and they knew the weight of what he was saying. "For SpaceX, we're going to work around the fuel issue and re-establish the mission timeline. But this time, we're not going to rush. We'll take the time to perfect every system so we're ready for the long haul. We're going to continue testing, refining, and pushing boundaries, but we will not sacrifice safety." Musk turned to the Tesla team. "And for Tesla? We're not backing down. The Cybertruck is going to be revolutionary, and production issues are only temporary. We'll streamline our processes, increase our supply chain efficiency, and get back on track. And we're not just going to focus on the next model. We're going to look at how we can expand the reach of electric vehicles worldwide, and we're going to continue our mission to reduce carbon emissions. He paused again, locking eyes with the team. This isn't just about making history. It's about creating a future we believe in. We can't afford to let these challenges break us. The room fell silent, but Musk could feel the energy in the air. He wasn't just talking to his team, he was talking to himself. The weight of leadership was heavy, but he was no stranger to carrying it. We can either fold under pressure, he continued, his voice growing stronger, or we can push forward, together. And let me tell you, there is no one I'd rather have by my side in this fight than all of you. Over the following weeks, Musk dove headfirst into both companies. Every detail, every decision, was scrutinized. SpaceX's engineers worked tirelessly to repair the communication systems, while the team focused on optimizing Starship's fuel reserves and ensuring the next mission would proceed smoothly. At Tesla, they ramped up production for the Cybertruck, addressing delays and working tirelessly to meet their ambitious goals. Through it all, Musk's energy remained unrelenting. He would spend hours in meetings with engineers and designers, checking progress and pushing his team to do more. Despite the exhaustion, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. He wasn't just solving problems, he was leading the charge toward the future. But even amidst the frenetic pace of work, Musk made time for moments of reflection. In the quiet of his office, he would often find himself gazing out the window, remembering the early days when all of this had seemed impossible. The challenges had seemed insurmountable, the odds stacked against him. But he had believed, and that belief had driven him forward. That belief hadn't wavered, not once. And now, he was more convinced than ever that humanity's future was in space. Mars was no longer just a dream, it was an inevitability. The breakthrough came when SpaceX successfully completed a test mission, restoring full communication with their Starship in orbit. It wasn't just a technical win, it was a symbolic one. The mission would move forward. As Musk sat in the command center, watching the engineers celebrate, he realized something. This was just the beginning. The team had overcome another hurdle, but the real work was still ahead. Mars was still waiting. In the midst of the victory, he received another update from Tesla. The production issues were resolving, and the Cybertruck was finally on schedule. The team was back on track, and the board had finally come around. They recognized the magnitude of SpaceX's accomplishments and were willing to back him fully. Musk's relief was palpable. The weight of the world hadn't been lifted, but it had been lightened, just a little. It wasn't long before the world took notice. Media outlets that had once questioned Musk's decisions and ability to lead now heralded him as a visionary. The successful landing on Mars, coupled with Tesla's recovery in forward momentum, had changed the narrative entirely. Where there had been doubt, there was now admiration. Musk, however, remained focused on the future. "This is just the beginning," he said in interviews. "What we've done here is amazing, but the goal has always been much bigger than that. We're on the verge of creating a sustainable future for humanity, and that's what drives me. That's what keeps me up at night." Later that evening, as Musk sat alone in his office, the silence was almost overwhelming. He glanced at the window, watching the lights of the city below. It had been a long road, but he had come out stronger on the other side. The setbacks had only made him more determined. The challenges had forged him into something more than just a CEO, he had become a symbol of resilience, of belief in the impossible. There would be more obstacles ahead, more battles to fight. But he was ready. Because Elon Musk had never been one to back down. In fact, he thrived on it. Every challenge, every failure, only fueled his drive. And as he looked toward the future, he knew that the impossible wasn't something to be feared, it was something to be conquered. The road to Mars, the journey toward a sustainable future, the push to transform humanity's potential, all of it lay before him. The path would be difficult, but Musk had learned one of the most important lessons of all: it's not about how many times you fall. It's about how many times you get back up. And Elon Musk had risen, stronger than ever. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?